Hello everyone, I hope you're doing great today and enjoyed these stories. I have a quick message before the video starts. Whether you're struggling with mental health or have any other internal demons that you're dealing with and finding it difficult to see to the other side, trust me, it does get better and you can completely turn everything around. Even if it seems dark now, it's just a case of trusting the process and to keep going. I promise you can change everything even if you don't believe it yourself just yet. So just stay strong and stay in there. So that was my message for today. And make sure you check out my Patreon for early access to my videos and my podcast in the description below. I hope you're all doing great today and have a good week. Take care, I'll speak to you all soon. I was camping right beside a glacier at the top of a mountain in the middle of nowhere. It was the summer, but the cold air coming off the icy blue wall was amazing. Now we set up a stone wall to keep the cool air off our tent. We sat at our camp and watched a couple of mountaineers climb up it. The next afternoon we went to walk up to a waterfall and we returned to where our tents were and they're demolished. A huge chunk of ice actually fell down and hit directly where we were staying. If we had stayed there or were sleeping, we'd be dead for sure. I'm somebody who loved to be in the outdoors and in the wilderness generally. I grew up very close to lots of different national parks, so being out in those kinds of places never really worried me, even if I was alone for that fact. Well, part of it must be because I actually descend from somebody who spent much of their life out there, my father. He was somebody who worked as a ranger for most of his life and he absolutely loved the job. Now my story is not actually about him, but I'm just trying to build up a picture of who I am and the kind of things that actually worry me or don't. So as you can imagine, it's more people that I guess I'm scared of because there's not too many things out there that I haven't encountered before. Now I have a couple of experiences and I'd like to share a few with you, but I'll start with one of the most creepy and that I really can't explain. So on one particular day during the winter, I was going on a hike on my own through a national park. Now, I'd done this lots of times before and never really had too many issues with the area that I went hiking on during this specific trip. You had to be careful during the winter months because obviously you're a lot colder naturally, but it was something I really learnt to deal with. Now, when I set out on this particular hike, for the first day everything was completely normal and I had a really good time. When I woken up the following morning for the next day, I realised it was noticeably colder and the atmosphere felt different. The forest, wow, I don't really know how to describe it other than just absolutely scenic. The trees cast beautiful shadows whenever there was sunlight piercing through the fog, and they were very tall, skinny trees that had lost many of their leaves due to the cold weather and obviously the season changing. But there was a few that still stayed strong, and they actually would throughout the entire season changing. There was lots of orange and yellow coloured leaves around me, so it looked really cool and Halloweeny, I guess. Now that's nothing to do with this story, but again, I just want to set the picture for you. So I quickly gathered up all of my gear and my blue tent and continue on my hike. Everything starts off as normal. I'm actually quite glad to get away from people. I spent a couple of months for college actually living in a very built up area and it really does my head in at times. Some days I'll walk for miles and miles just to try and get away from people, but when you live in a major city it's pretty much impossible. And you often find that if you manage to get away from people you actually end up in relatively dodgy areas and it's actually quite dangerous, so if you get the point, you never really get your own peace of mind or moments away from people. Not that I really have a problem with people, just sometimes you need to be with yourself and I to really get in with yourself and relax. So some of these things are on my mind while I'm walking, and I'm happy that I'm probably only ever going to encounter an animal on this trip. I haven't run into somebody so far, so I'm feeling confident that it's going to remain like this for the rest of my trip. At this point I'm walking downhill now and I have to stop to drink some water, and I realise that the fog's thicked up quite a lot now. I can't really see further than, let's say 10 or 20 meters ahead of me. It kind of looks like you're seeing the same trees because of it too, which is actually relatively disorientating, but I'm along a path where you can see lots of ATVs or similar vehicles have been. Now there's also some relatively high grass around me, which is actually very damp, and I'm actually having a problem keeping my pants dry because of this. Now it's a random point, but just as a note, I'm actually wearing a camouflage jacket because A, I can't really be bothered to encounter other people, and B, I think it looks cool. So this basically means if anybody's trying to watch me, they're going to have a really difficult time. That's why I'm a little off guard when I have the strange feeling that something's staring at me. It's something that I've experienced many times before, but I know it can't really be an animal because I haven't seen any for a while now, and I'm fairly big, and I'm pretty sure the animals that are known in this area are going to stay well clear of me. I ignore it and just continue on, actually picking up the pace a fair bit now. At the time I do actually have a mask on for the coldness of the winter, but I'm actually struggling to breathe quite a lot now because of the fog making it very damp in my mask. I take it off, and as I go down one section of a hill, I notice the fog seems to get extremely thick. I mean, this is to the point that if I was going to fall over and slide a bit, I wouldn't be able to see where I'm stopping until I'm pretty much there. Doesn't matter though, I just continue on. I notice now how the trees seem to have picked up too. A lot more lively than before, but this is actually comforting for me. I continue going downhill until eventually I'm met by more normal trees, in the sense that they're full of life and leaves, and I actually feel quite good. What's good here is that in this area of the forest there doesn't seem to be any fog really. I can probably see a good 60 meters ahead of me, and I feel really happy about this. That's when I notice it. There's some kind of carving on a bit of wood further up. Now no, I didn't panic and think it's a person staring back at me, and it wouldn't worry me again because my camouflage, but this is something really odd. I think maybe somebody's left it here as a joke or something, or just forgotten about it, so I head up on into the deeper part of the woods to investigate. And this is very bizarre. It appears to be about 50 years old and a complete wood carving with some faded white paint on it. I'd have to say it was from the 1950s or 60s, but it's hard to say exactly what it is. It looks like somebody's lived out here and just carved it and left it there. I pick it up thinking it's quite a cool souvenir, which I know is probably a bad idea because A, what if this thing's cursed, and B, I don't exactly know what it is. So anyway, I don't think of this at the time, and I just take my new friend with me. I managed to fit this thing onto the very top of my backpack, and I strap it in so it looks like it's looking behind me. I jokingly give it a name and call it Carl and say, "Hey Carl, you better watch my back or I'm going to drop you off again," and start laughing. Now, I didn't realise at the time, but it probably looked terrifying because of my camouflage. It would just appear to be a floating head on the back of somebody's body walking through the forest mist. But I probably scared a few animals, so I guess that was a plus. And I guess if any mountain lion or similar creature come, it might scare them off, but anyway, I continue on. I completely forget about the small thing that I've just found, and I'm really taken away by the beauty of this area of the forest. I'm someone who really appreciates those things, but I also appreciate how cold it's getting now, and I end up jogging for a little bit. I decide that I don't want to go too far in to the point that I get lost, and I ended up staying for a few minutes just to capture my breath again. I decide that I should take a quick nap now and set up my sleeping bag. I eventually fall asleep, not before setting the alarm for a couple of hours so I don't waste too much time. I wake up and see eyes staring back at me. I scream, and then hit myself as I realise what's happened. I wake up face to face with that stupid carving that I found, forgetting it was there and wondering who was staring at me. I say, "God, why did you have to scare me like that, Carl?" laughing, trying to reassure myself. I'm fairly happy now because much of the fog is cleared and I can actually see much better now. I put Coral into my backpack and I continue onwards. This time he's actually in cover, so I'm not scaring anyone with my camouflage. I notice again that the trees are getting much more lively here and it actually makes me feel a lot better. While I'm walking, I hear a very loud thud against the tree. It literally sounds like a boulder being thrown into some area of the forest, and a loud thump afterwards. I think this is really odd because I literally have no idea what made this sound. Worried that maybe somebody's got hurt, like I don't know who, I go and investigate like an idiot. I ended up walking quite far from where I originally started and I actually get a little bit lost and can't figure out where I've come from. What's most strange though is none of the trees are disturbed whatsoever. Everything seems completely normal and I'm now sure that I've stood exactly where the sound was coming from and I can't see anything. I think maybe it was just something that is completely normal and explainable and I continue on with Coral in my bag. One strange thing though is that since this has happened, my eyes keep shaking. It's almost like if you're looking through a phone camera and somebody keeps hitting the side of the phone, making everything blurry for a second. It's really odd because it's something I've not experienced before and I just presumed it was dehydration. I stop and quickly start slamming my water. I continue onwards and I notice something odd. There seems to be one more face just further up in the distance. I say, "Hey, we've got you a friend," jokingly, and tap my backpack, and I continue on. A little bit excited and stupidly, I jog on now, and I pick this up again. It looks exactly like the one I've already found, and I'm sure somebody's left it here for their friend. I go to reach into my backpack to make some space for it and I realise that Coral is gone. That doesn't make sense. It was in my backpack just a few minutes ago. And this one looks exactly the same, but how can that be? This can't possibly be Coral because I was literally holding him with me the whole time. I say, "Sorry buddy, maybe it's time to just leave you here." I quickly put it back where I left it and I start jogging a bit to get away from it. Now yes, this could have easily been me, just not realising I put it down somewhere, but I don't have any memory of it. And one thing that dawns on me suddenly, which is really unexplainable, is how when I fell asleep, I woke up with that thing facing me. I 100% left it in my backpack, half tucked in, so it shouldn't have been facing me directly when I woke up. Maybe I'd moved it in my sleep, but I've never done that before, and I was also in my sleeping bag. It's not time for me to dwell on such things and I continue forward. I'm feeling pretty unsettled now and I've noticed something really strange. Just off in the horizon, there appears to be an absolutely massive figure moving just off in the distance. It's as big as a tree but literally moving. I look to my left and right to make sure it's not something wrong with my eyes and look up again. And sure enough, there is some very tall menacing figure moving off ahead of me. I manage to convince myself that this can't be right, and I just head off in the opposite direction to where I was heading. I turn around for a second to catch more glimpses of it, and it's gone. This is really bizarre and something that I still can't explain. I like to think maybe it was a tree falling and that's what the sounds are, but this literally looked like a giant moving through the woods. It's really odd. I mean, to the point that I even question my own sanity over it, but I digress. Now luckily for me, I make it back onto the rough area that I know. I take a right and move past a tree that appears to be shaped more like a skeleton. I think this is really odd, and I stop to investigate it. What's really bizarre is this is another carving of what appears to be human remains. It's really odd. It looks like it's from much further ago than the original head that I found, almost like Native American era. It's hard to describe. This thing is clearly not old, but it appears to be years old. I realise something's wrong now and I head off again, trying not to think of everything while not connecting dots in my head because I know it's going to make me panic. Now once again, I hear something fall, very large in the distance. Now could this be some kind of giant chasing me? I doubt it. Probably just a tree falling, but that means that they're probably going to fall on me. Now common sense should prevail and I should just continue going, getting out of this forest as quick as possible, but no. The inquisitive side of me takes over. I mean, hey, my dad is a ranger, so that's probably natural for me. I end up going to where I think this sound is coming from, and again I can't see anything. Until there's a whisper just behind me. It's just faint enough to hear, but I know it was directed to me. I turn around to figure out exactly what this is, and I can see somebody bent over, almost praying. I call out hey and say, God, you scared the hell out of me. What are you doing? There's no reply. I say hey and stop myself. I have a small knife in my pocket which I now grab and say, if you're hurt I can help you, don't worry. And I go over to investigate. My heart begins to race and I'm feeling very trembly, almost like I'm walking through quicksand. I then realise this thing is a tree. Well, not a tree. Some wood that's been sculpted into the shape of someone bent over praying. It's not exactly like a person, but more like the outline of a person. It looks like it's been burnt too, but what's really bizarre is that none of the surroundings were charcoaly or anything that you'd usually expect from a fire, so this is something else that I can't really explain. I then turn to my left to see if there's anything else when something catches my eye. Up in the top of the tree there seems to be a cross shape. Again, I don't know exactly what this is because of the fog and whatnot, and I'm sure as hell not going to go up the tree. But it almost looks like the branches have been arranged too perfectly for it not to be by people. I turn back again to look at the sculpture and I realise that there's more of them. I give my eyes a few seconds to adjust and I can see 10 of them form in a circle. They're all at different heights and elevations, which is pretty strange, but they're all pointing towards me now, or whoever's standing in the middle. I realise something's very odd and I get the shaking again in my eyes. I'm not sure whether this was from fear and something that I've not really experienced before, but I truly don't know what to think at this point. Now, I'll admit it, I felt pretty stupid at the time. Why was I getting scared by pieces of wood? I mean, literally, who does that? Especially when you've got a knife and you've grew up in these areas, but something was just off at this point. I decide that I need to investigate what these are and I go closer to one. Now, this particular one seems to be slightly bigger than all of the rest and looks a little different. Upon further investigation, I realise that this actually has carvings on it. Now they're pretty hard to describe, but they're more like patterns and almost like somebody was trying to form a language but didn't know how to. I then put my hand up just to feel these and there's white noise in my left ear and whispering. All I can hear is whispering. The panic makes me step back quickly and the moment I do, the whispering stops. I can hear laughing now, echoing around the trees. I know something's very wrong, and I go lightheaded again. I ended up passing out for I don't know how long, but when I woke up, it was noticeably darker again. The fog was much heavier this time, and I was very disorientated for a few seconds. I eventually get my bearings again and stand up. Now when I stood up, I realised that most of these had been moved, or rather have disappeared completely, except for one, the one that I touched with the carvings on it. This time, upon closer inspection, it looks like it's aged. Almost like it's been set on fire for a second time, but it clearly hasn't been. How could it? I was right next to it and nothing's burnt on the floor around me. I realise that something is way off and this can't all possibly be in my head. I shouted that whatever this is to leave me alone, gripping my knife. In a fit of rage, I end up stabbing this stupid piece of wood, and I can't withdraw the knife after the third stab. I ended up cutting my finger, in fact, and actually was quite concerned now, so decide that I have to leave. I have a small first aid kit with me, and on the go I quickly bandage myself up, not bothering to look behind me. What the heck was that thing? What happened? I'm now dripping blood through the forest as my bandage isn't really holding up too well. It's relatively dark now, and in a state of paranoia, all of the trees look like tall figures surrounding me. I don't know whether this was dehydration or a potential onset of a vasovagal reaction to losing blood, but I'm really out of it now. Maybe I hit my head when I fell down, but who knows. I continue down and I really feel like I'm in hell. I've never experienced dying, as I'm sure most people haven't, but I'm sure this is what it feels like. As I walk down the path, the trees seem to reflect off the ground below me, and it seems like I'm walking into internal blackness with no way out. It seems like the trees are impossibly tall, and the fog is impossibly thick and crazily dark. I know I have to keep walking off in a direction, but I really hope I don't end up lost. I mean, God, maybe my dad will have to save me. I can't have that. Not his son. I decide I must keep on taking steps forwards. This time I have no bearings or general sense of direction. I stupidly feel safer in the darker side of the trees, hoping my camo can do its job. I take a moment to look behind me, and I don't see anything, luckily. I was certain that those weird sculpture things were going to start appearing again, or maybe I would see something walking, but there's nothing. I continue down, and I realise that it's getting very dark. I do have a way to communicate, and I quickly pull out my phone, but there's no service. What's worse is the battery dies after a few minutes because of the damp. I now realise that I'm probably going to have to camp out here alone. But where? Where's safe now? I'm also very worried about my cart getting infected, and it's never going to stay dry because of the fog and the dampness, but with the darkness at its onset, I don't really have a choice. I can see a general clearing that I can go and set up camp in, but I decide I should actually try and hide now. I go near a fallen tree and set up a small tarp, and make sure that I'm very well hidden. I keep all of my camo gear on, and then I black out. I can remember waking up the following morning to not a bright sunny day, but fog everywhere. But it's not as bad this time. I actually feel much better now, and thankfully my sleep was entirely uneventful. My bandage is completely saturated now, and I have to change it over to my last one, and I continue until eventually I find a path that I know should lead me back to civilization. I can see the sun slightly penetrating through the trees, which is actually reassuring. But then, I can hear it, the sound of something large falling again. Just very far off this time. I have some comfort in knowing that I must have got a long way from where I started, but not in the sense that I don't know where I'm going now. I feel trapped and panic until eventually I can see a road. I ended up sprinting towards it and screaming, trying to get cars to stop, but the first one doesn't. I must have looked like an absolute maniac, especially wearing my camouflage, and I realised that I need to calm down. I glance over my shoulder once again, and I can see a very tall outline of a figure with stick legs staring at me. I take a second before I realise that it's just a tree, and I say God and slap myself to try and snap out of it. Eventually another car comes past and I'm able to flag them down. They say, God, are you okay? What happened? How long have you been out there? clearly concerned by the way that I appear, but I tell them not to worry. Nothing happened, I'm fine, I've just ran out of supplies, and they eventually agreed to take me over to the next town. I end up staying there in a hotel for the night, and eventually catch a ride to go and get my car, and drive out of there. I eventually make it back to safety, and I tell my dad about what had happened because I don't know who else to talk to. I know for a fact that he's probably the only one that's going to believe me, and what my dad said really chilled me to the bone. He's heard stories from other rangers about when they've been on patrols or whatnot and have stumbled into ancient Native American artifacts and whatnot, and emphasise the importance of never touching them or playing with them. Yeah, thanks Dad. I definitely needed to learn that one right now from you. But he says don't worry about it, and he doesn't doubt for a second what I saw. He says even he's seen some tall things walking off in the distance that almost appear like giant creatures or large pencils. But he just puts it down to not knowing what's out there in the woods, and I guess that's true in a sense. We really don't know what's out there in the woods, and I think there's some things that it's best not knowing or disturbing. I just wish I hadn't have been so stupid in the fact that I'd messed around with whatever I found out there, and I always knew for the future and even to this day that I must respect the forest and nature because we live there but we don't own it, and it's very easy for us to forget that at times. Please don't make the same mistake that I did. So I was solo camping and was on a hike to my favourite spot. I saw what appeared to be a man holding a massive rock in one hand and a knife in the other facing me. It's pretty weird, but other bushcrafters have been known to set up camp there too. I hit him with a standard "hey man" and wave. I get a bit closer and it looks like it was just a rock, so I laughed it off and turned around and started walking away. A rock then whizzed by my right ear, fast enough and big enough to really hurt me if it hit me. I turned around to see where the rock had come from, and the figure I'd seen wasn't standing there anymore. A few years back, I went camping with two buddies in the mountains near Lake Tahoe. We hiked about 2 hours with our packs to a small lake and set up camp. All was normal during the day. We made some hot dogs and beans and then stayed up until it was dark to watch the stars. Once it was dark out, we hiked up to the top of a large boulder to get a vantage point to see the stars over the trees. I recalled that there was no moon out that night because we could see the stars so clearly due to the limited ambient light, and we're pretty far out so there's no background noises or lights from humans. Once our eyes are adjusted after an hour and a half or so, we could see all the stars and even some satellites slowly moving across the sky. So no, it's very dark out with no moon, which is going to be important later. So, after a couple of hours of stargazing, we head down to our tents and set up right by the lake. We have a 2-person tent for the 3 of us. Now my 2 friends shared one tent and I was alone in another one. We set up tents right next to each other on top of the same flat spot. I fell asleep relatively easily because I was tired from hiking and exploring all day, and because it was so dark. I like sleeping in the dark though. However, at about 3 or 4 AM, I wake up to a rustling on the side of my tent. I'm half asleep and dazed. I'm not sure if it's just a wind or something. I keep listening and realize that something is brushing against the side of my tent and it sounds like a large animal pushing its nose up against it, sniffing. The sound is coming from the side of my tent right next to my head, so I can hear it super clearly. At this point my heart's racing and I'm lying frozen in my sleeping bag hoping that whatever it is outside will leave me alone. I think about calling out to my friends in their tent, but I don't want to startle or anger whatever is outside, so I decide just to keep lying still, hoping it will leave. My mind is going through every possibility and then I realise what it is. We set up our tents earlier in the day and there wasn't much flat space, so we put up our tents close to each other. Evidently, they were so close that when my friend was moving his feet in the sleeping bag, it brushed up against the tent next to my head. So all along it was my friend's moving around view. However, the weird stuff doesn't really stop there, and I realised that this next part was weird once we had left the next day and I'd gone home. As I laid in my tent and tried to slow my heart after realising the rustling was my friend, I was looking at the shadows of the trees on the walls of my tent. They reminded me of when I was younger and cars would slowly drive down the street and the headlights would go through the blinds. At the time it made sense to me, and I thought it was just like when I was a kid. Now, considering I just thought a creature was outside my tent, this doesn't seem wrong. However, as I mentioned earlier, it was a dark and moonless night, so what could the light have been? It was a very slow moving drawing light that had the shadows of the trees moving slowly across the walls of my tent for about 5 minutes. By the way, we're miles away from civilization, so it was no car or flashlight, and it was moving very steadily. It could have been a flare in the sky or maybe a comet in the darkness. I still don't know what it could have been, but I only ever realised after I'd left the campsite and didn't put my head out to investigate at the time. Now when I was young, like maybe 9 or 10, my cousin and I were walking down behind my grandparents' house and at the edge of the woods to where their pig pen is. The black fence borders the woods and was heavily overgrown with bushes. Now there was a small path that had a worn out and very small clearing where some chairs had been placed. It was kind of like a natural clubhouse. Once you're in that tiny clearing, you couldn't see in or out of it. Now we were walking down the little path, and just before we get there into the clearing, we could see some adult sitting in one of the chairs, kind of leaned over with his hands on his head. I turned around and ran over to my cousin to get out of there. She ran behind me asking what was wrong. I don't stop running until I get back to my grandparents' house, and I told my grandpa about what was there. And we went back down to investigate, but the man's gone. The thing is, even at that age, I knew that I had to duck down and get out of the clearing. Now what's weird was that a fully grown adult would have had to crawl on his hands and knees to get in or out of that area. I had no idea how anybody noticed where the path was because it was so discreet. I don't know how he was able to get out of there too. I'm 46 now and still think of it to this day. There's been lots of creepy and weird stuff that occurred over at the Heath. I'll tell you about this because it was the strongest worst feeling that Elle and I had ever experienced together at the same time. It was one of the most sinister, menacing sensations I've ever felt. I say this coming from a family of sensitives who had paranormal and supernatural experiences all my life. When we were 7, Mama took Cousin Elle and I over Hounslow Heath for our usual adventures that were common in the summer holidays. Instead of the regular route, we used to love collecting feathers and other natural things that we found to make collages with, or picking fat juicy berries and whatnot off bushes, and these would be given to our gran to make pies with. Now Mama took us to one of her old haunts as a child called Paradise. Paradise was thought to have been the location of either an old coaching inn or a power mill, and was just very stark bare massive open fields with skeletal remains of ancient looking stones and wooden buildings and very old wooden tree stumps that are scattered everywhere throughout the area. Over the years, Paradise had fallen victim to attacks of arson, and the local council burning the field to keep it from being overgrown and unmanaged, so the appearance of Paradise was somewhat desolate and bleak due to the burnt grass and whatnot. The obvious difference between the otherwise lush and green area around Paradise and Paradise itself was clear to Elle and I, and immediately we both actually say the same thing about Paradise, calling it the burnt place. We felt very uneasy, and I can tell you that Elle and I couldn't stop staring at it. Now you know the feeling when you grow up with somebody and you don't have to say anything, you feel the same? Well, we had that. Now, I was in my wheelchair investigating the ground around me, and Elle was a little bit further off. Mama was looking at something else. Suddenly, Elle looked up at me and said, "Shiv, can you hear anything?" I was suddenly struck by the silence of the area. Normally, Heath would actually be alive with the comforting sound of birds and small insects and whatnot. It was a constant soundtrack playing, but there's no sound. Nor, come to mention that, there was no evidence of any living things. In fact, I didn't see any birds at all. I said this to Elle, and we both looked to the sky before continuing our investigation of the burnt ground and its remains. Looking carefully, I come to an awful realization that the ground's actually scattered with lots of small animal skeletal bones and skulls charged that have been there for years. We both look over at each other and say, "Can we go, please?" My mum looks at both of us and laughs. We then tell her about the animals and the silence and everything there. My mum just explained that it was only to be expected from a dead area, but she didn't say much about the silence, and she just said, "Okay, let's go back." When we got home, we told our grandma about it, and we talked about it all night. Now we're adults, and as Elle has her own children, they ask us about our childhood, and sometimes we tell them about this story, but something about the silence of it I really can't explain, and it truly scares me. It was really like being in hell. Now, I've had a lot of weird experiences while hiking in the forest before, but there was one that really took the cake for me. I was due to go hiking with a group of friends, but it started raining heavily, and most of my friends had actually backed out of it, but I wasn't going to stop. So, I decided that I'm going to go on with the two friends that will go with me, Ben and Ryan. These are brothers who have always been really cool to me, and we were all good friends, so this was great. Now, before we started, there was a huge puddle that we had to go around, and funnily, my friends started trying to push each other in before we actually got across the thing, and myself included. Ryan fell in, which we all thought was really funny, but it wasn't really, I guess, because he was going to get cold, so we actually have to head back just to change clothes and go again. Now, I guess that's how it is with friends and brothers, but hey, we're having a good time. Now, as we get into the first part of the hike, there's a very big stream, and we're actually daring each other to go across it, thinking it's going to be really funny, knowing one of us would probably fall in. But even our own stupidity had limits, and we weren't going to go into that stream. We know if we fell in, we probably weren't going to come out again, so we decided that we should just go on the normal path. Now, it's extremely slippery, and we're all being careful not to fall because there's almost a stream of rain below our feet. Now, we end up making it into a relatively dry area. There's lots of dead leaves on the floor, so it's very slushy. It means we can hear each other really well, but it is extremely slippery, so we have to be careful not to fall in. Now, we can see the odd jogger or two while we're out here. Now, there's two who are wearing blue jackets, but they ended up jogging straight past us. We're actually quite annoyed because they've splashed a lot of water on us in the process, but they say sorry. Now, we continue on our hike and make it into a much deeper part of the forest. We're actually trying to get in further so we can get under some trees now. As we do so, we notice there's one more jogger that goes past, but it's actually quite hard to differentiate the exact direction they're going in. Because it's odd, they seem to be going straight through the trees and not on a path, but hey, we can't be bothered to investigate. We eventually come across another stream where there's a rock, and we have to jump on the rock before jumping across the stream. We all make it across intact, but Ryan tries to block his brother from getting across last minute, and it's actually really funny. But we all make it across in one piece. Now, why we were out here in the rain, I don't really know, to be honest, but it has no signs of stopping now. Ryan suddenly spots out, "Do you think the jogger's lost? I keep seeing him going past." And I jokingly say, "No, it's a bear, Ryan. Don't worry, it's just coming to eat us. It's not lost, you haven't got to help it." And we continue on. Now, none of us really raised an eyebrow at it at the time. The rain eventually stops and we're very relieved about this. Now, Ryan goes ahead of me into the darker part of the forest, and me and my other friend just stopped to have a small discussion for a couple of minutes and try and dry off our socks. We can then hear Ryan talking and say, "Hey, yeah, we're gonna be there in a minute, just wait for us, come on. We gotta dry off our socks." Then we realise that he's not actually talking to us. We can then see a jogger sprinting off, and we just assume that maybe he's had to tell him directions and don't think anything of it. We then catch up with Ryan and he doesn't say a word to us. Ben says, "Hey, what's up, bro?" And he says, "Something about that guy was just off." We all look at each other confused and Ryan says, "There was something about the way he smiled at me that was really strange." We then say, "Well, what did you talk about?" And he said, "Well, he just smiled at me, and I just pointed and said, 'That's the way you need to get out of here.'" He didn't say anything, then just sprinted off. Now, me and Ben both started bursting out laughing, saying, yeah, definitely." And he says, "No, seriously." And we kind of just laugh it off and say it's probably nothing, just somebody lost out here. We continue on in our hike and the rain's completely stopped. We're happy about this because it was drizzling from the trees on us before. We're walking quite a weird path now because we have to constantly avoid puddles. We do this for about a good hour before we decide it's probably time to head back. We end up coming across a weird thing though on our walk. There appears to be a tree that's positioned perfectly in front of us to make us go down another area. We think this is odd because it literally looks like somebody's done this on purpose, but there's no one around to have done it. But it seems to be freshly laid. Even parts of underneath it are still dry. We think this is odd and dare each other to go down the path first. I felt more brave at the time, so volunteer myself. As I do so, I have a strange feeling that we shouldn't have done this, and I turn around to Ryan, who looks at me to confirm the same thing. As I'm walking, there's a large splash next to me, and I turn around and say, "Hey, don't do that." And suddenly a stone hits my friend Ben. For a split second we think it's Ryan, but we realise it can't be because he's right next to us. We stop for a second and realise that somebody's throwing stones at us now, and we can't figure out where it's coming from. We look at each other kind of as if to say, "What the hell is that?" We quickly arm ourselves with rocks in case we can throw it back, but we literally had no idea where they come from. It's really strange because nobody in their right mind would be throwing rocks at people. I mean, hell, we're gonna beat them up if we can catch them, we know that for sure. And we continue on. Now, as we're walking, we catch just off to our right something moving quickly through the trees. Ryan then screams out, "God, that's him, the one I told you about earlier, quick, quick, quick." And he stupidly throws a stone at him, and he stops and stares at us. Now, I'll never forget the stare that he did. This person literally looks like a zombie. His face is almost completely white. His teeth are yellow to contrast it, and his eyes seem too far sunk into his head. He's wearing a weird dark kind of uniform that's hard to describe. It looks like robes, but kind of greenish tinges around the edges, if that makes sense. He doesn't say a word. The next thing we know, we can hear an absolutely horrifying scream sound coming from him. It sounds too loud to be human. Now what happened next, I can only describe as I saw it, and it's something I don't question because the other two saw the same thing. Now whatever this she is, it seemingly floats the next 2 meters down towards us. Yes, float. Not walking over the rocks, but floating. Yeah, they could have been walking weirdly and tiptoeing through the rocks, but I swear to you this was almost like they were floating with a dark robe, covering their feet, still letting out that horrifying screaming sound towards us, only now smiling. As you can imagine, that was our cue to get out of there. Luckily all of us are relatively fit, so we actually managed to go quite a good jog in a U-turn kind of shape. We make it onto the path that we've come from, and none of us bothered looking behind us. We have to run and jump over a stream, and Ben hilariously but terrifyingly falls in. We quickly drag him up because it's very dangerous, because if he falls down he could literally get carried away into a stream. We then turn back and realise that this thing is just off in the tree line, slowly coming towards us still, but no longer screaming. None of us say a word to each other, and we just say we have to get back out of here. We continue jogging through the trees for another good 10 minutes. We look behind us periodically but don't see anything. We continue up until eventually we make it back to the main road. We all quickly jump into Ben's car and he speeds out of there, not going at a reasonable speed. I keep looking around in the passenger seat, hoping this thing doesn't appear. I glare out of the window and I can't see it. We eventually make it back to the safety of my house, and we don't bother telling my parents what happened. But luckily Ben, who's older than us at the time, makes a phone call and informs the police about what happened, and they say they're going to investigate. I think the best case scenario is it's a crazy person that's out there just trying to scare people, but worse, I don't really know what it could have been. If it was just myself that day, I would have doubted it, but all of us saw the exact same thing. I don't know what you guys think of it, but it's an experience that's never been able to leave me. What really got me is the way it moved. Just not normal, not natural at all. Something about this whole situation was very wrong and off. Hello everyone. Now I'd like to say that I'm from Scandinavia, so my story might be a little different than some of the ones you're used to hearing of rangers, but I can't really explain what I saw, and I'd like to get you guys' thoughts on it too. I'm from Sweden, so I've really been blessed with some beautiful scenery. A lot of people presume that it would actually become normal to me, but it hasn't whatsoever. I've been to all the Nordic countries, and my particular favourites are Norway and Sweden. A lot of our scenery is similar too, just with varying mountainscapes and whatnot, but the weather is usually consistently the same in terms of coldness during the colder months and beautiful summer days during the summer. Now, I'm somebody who had often done solo hiking through an area close to where I live. I'd done this a couple of times with my friends and then dad, but usually on my own, and in one particular day I set off like normal on my own. To do this I have to catch a bus ride. Now when I get on the bus there's not too many people on there, just myself for much of the journey, until eventually what appears to be a sweet old lady gets on the bus. When she gets on the bus, she does seem to stare at me quite a lot, which I think is really odd. Now there's something about her eyes that look pretty off, and this continues on and off for the whole half-hour journey until I eventually get off and thank the driver. What I think is really strange is the way that she continues staring at me even as the bus goes off. I don't know, maybe she thinks I've done something wrong or I look like somebody who was bad to her in the past, but I don't know, I just think it was pretty odd. But that's not my story. Now when I get to the area I usually go hiking in, I'm very glad because it's completely empty now and there's no signs of other hikers whatsoever. And the trees are absolutely beautiful and dwarf me. I can see some of the insects too, which is actually nice for me because I have a passion for life and outdoors creatures. Now, there was lots of forest scrubs around and small bushes and plants everywhere, which made for very pleasant walking. Now, the first part of my hike actually goes really well, and I continue drinking my water, ensuring that I stay hydrated. Now, I have to be careful in one particular area because the hill is very steep, and if I were to fall, I don't know how long it would take until I reach the bottom. I mean, heck, that's if I ever do. Now, I make it through one area and come over to a hill. Now, what's interesting about this particular area is there's lots of red or orange coloured plants, which I find really beautiful. You do find in these particular areas though that you have to constantly look at the ground. There's lots of rocks on the path, and if you're not careful you can really easily go over one. I take a moment to stop and admire the beauty of the place when a hiker comes past saying, hey, did you see that thing? I say, hey, what's wrong? He says, that thing in the sky is crazy. I think, yeah, this guy's clearly off his head, and I just let him go off on his own. He continues talking, saying it's crazy, the thing in the sky, like he's carrying on the conversation with me, but I'm not there. I don't let it bother me too much though, and I continue on. I can see a beautiful lake not far off from where I'm sitting and a mountainscape just behind it. This is truly beautiful, and I take in some time to admire it and finish off the rest of my tea before I continue onwards. Now on this particular hike, my plan was never actually to stay the night, but to head back, because I have some homework I have to do when I get in, so I'm constantly present and being careful of my time. Now when I glance down at my watch, the time seems to be going very quickly, and that's always a sign that you're enjoying yourself, right? So I continue onwards. Up ahead of me, I can see a small hilltop. Maybe it's a mountain range, I don't really know how to describe it for you, but there's trees up on both sides of it, and I think, God, wouldn't it be great if I can make it to the top of that thing? There is a path you can take to get there, but it's relatively dangerous. I stop for a moment to decide what to do, and I realise there's a spider on my shoelace. I absolutely hate these things, so I kick it off quickly and end up jogging a bit. It's unlikely, but I'm worried that I've just sat on a bunch of them, so I think the best thing to do is keep moving. While I've got this momentum going, I decide that I'm going to go up the hill. Now if I fall, I'm really going to be in trouble because the rock face is actually relatively sheer, and there's lots and lots of different rocks which are relatively loose, so it basically means if I go off the side I'm not really in luck. So I have to be very careful at this time. Now while I'm walking, I can see more of the red coloured plants that I really like. I'm probably about 2 hours off getting to the top of this thing, and I decide that yeah, I'm gonna go for it. It's not really the best of ideas, but I go for it. I eventually make it towards the top, and my god, the view's absolutely beautiful. I decide that I should just wait here and watch the sunset. I wait for a couple of minutes and I can't figure out where the sun is. I then embarrassingly and stupidly realise that the sun's already set, and my incredible self didn't realise that it had, and I was waiting here getting cold. I now realise that it's time to head back home, and I turn to leave. Just as I do so, I see a flashing light out of the corner of my eye. I rub my eye for a second, thinking that maybe something's hit it, like a stone that I haven't realised from somewhere higher up than where I am currently, but I realise that's not possible. I then see a blue flashing light in the sky. Now, this thing was much brighter than anything else I've ever seen before. It's almost impossibly bright. And what's one beam seems to become two, then three. They start hovering up and down and seem to be closing in to where I am. Now, I haven't taken any drugs or anything. I never have. But I know I shouldn't be seeing this. I consider maybe there's something wrong with my eye and look away, then back again, and I realise that the lights are coming closer. I decide to jog down the hill as quick as possible, trying to get away from these things. As I'm jogging, I can see another one of those just up to the right, seemingly landing on top of the hill. I stop for a moment in absolute amazement as what appears to be two very tall figures come out of it and stand staring at me until the light vanishes, but they don't. I turn around and the other lights have gone, but I can still see those giant figures on top of the hill. And when I say giant, I mean they must have been at least 12 feet tall, and they're very tall stick-like creatures. That's not really a good situation, I say to myself. They then turn round and go down the side of the hill. Oh boy, this isn't good. They're going towards the exit that I need to go to, and God knows if there's more of these things. I ended up jogging back down the hill as quick as I possibly can, doing my best Usain Bolt impression. I stupidly don't look where I'm going and ended up falling over completely, luckily catching myself in a small tree. It hurt like heck, and there was actually spiders on me, which I probably hated more than anything. It actually made me worry so much I forgot about those tall things. I ended up doing a light jog until eventually I make it back to the bus stop. Now there's no sign of anyone until I suddenly see that crazy guy again, going off down another area of the hill, and it suddenly hits me. Whatever that guy must have seen, I've seen too, and I suddenly remember the tall figures again. I'm completely shaken up by this experience, and I speak to the bus driver when the bus eventually comes, constantly looking behind me saying, "God, you've got to tell me you saw that thing too." He confirms to me that he did have reports from other bus drivers seeing strange things in the sky, also describing the blue flashy lights. I ended up racing home and reporting it to my mum. We looked all over the internet, all over the news, expecting to see some kind of alien invasion of Earth, but nothing. Not a drop of information related to what I had seen that day. Now, I really don't know what to think. I don't want to sound like one of those crazy UFO guys that you see on the TV, but I know exactly what I saw. I saw two weird creatures come out of one of the craft things or lights, whatever it was, and the other people saw this too. But how can that be? It doesn't make any logical sense. I don't really want to say it was aliens, but I don't know what to make of it. I was actually so shaken up from this experience that I've never went solo hiking again since. Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great and enjoy these stories. If you want early access to my videos, then make sure you check out my Patreon in the description where you can get early access. I also have a podcast which is linked in the description, and the only social that I really use is Instagram, so I have a link for that in the description too if you want to see that. So I hope you enjoyed these stories. These were actually some of my favourite that I've narrated, so I really hope you enjoy them as much as I did reading them. Or narrating them technically. So before the video starts, I have a quick message as always. Remember that if you're dealing with anxiety, it's okay and it is completely normal to get anxious about things. But if you find your anxiety is actually becoming a hindrance in your life and getting in the way of normal things, and you can't do certain things that other people seem to be able to without being in a world of anxiety, you could potentially have social anxiety or other anxiety problems that you could fix with therapy and getting the right help. Honestly, sometimes you just need to hear it and realize that the anxiety that you could be experiencing isn't normal, and trust me, there's a night and day difference once you receive help for these things. So if anybody out there is experiencing that, make sure you check it out and look into it a bit. I think it can make a difference for someone. So I hope you enjoyed these and take care. I'll speak to you all soon. Working as a park ranger, there was lots of crazy things that I've seen out in the woods on my own. I'll go through a few for you today. I remember one time one of my colleagues radioed in saying that he was sure he saw a meteorite or a white UFO crash in the distance one night. I said, okay, I don't know what you've taken, but I'm gonna go and investigate, half joking with him. As I set out in my truck, I realised that there was some kind of emergency beacon, and my god, he wasn't wrong. There was a fire trail in the woods that luckily hadn't spread, and, half expecting to find something from out of this world, I was very surprised to find a plane that had crashed. By the grace of God, everybody lived from the accident and was fine, but it was crazy to see. Honestly, it was like something out of a movie. Now that was my first story. The next one is a complete different thing. It was when I was on vacation in a desert with some of my cousins. Now we were going on this long hike and it was close to nightfall. Now my youngest cousin kept on sprinting off, and it didn't bother us because a few of us were actually rangers or had military experience, so we felt relatively safe. Now, my cousin twisted his ankle and we're all quite annoyed because we know how dangerous this is. If it's a fracture or break, it's going to take a while before we can get back to help. Now, I rush over to go and help him, and I also fall down too. I fall down onto rocks and land on some kind of scrub or destroyed wood. I don't really know how to describe it, but almost like a big bit of wood that's been there for years that was once a tree. Now this thing snaps and my other cousin grabs my arm and says, "Jesus Christ." I say, "Yeah, I know it's slippery here." He says, "No, look." He then shines his torch off to the left and I can see literally hundreds of cactuses below. It was a good 20 feet drop down off of these rocks too. If I had fallen into them, well, I don't even want to think about what could have happened. More than anything, I was just glad that my youngest cousin hadn't gone and got hurt, because God, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself if that happened. Now, for my next story, this is more just creepy than anything. I wouldn't necessarily say it was a paranormal experience, but just something really odd. Now, while I was working as a ranger, one particular evening I got a call out to go and investigate a potential illegal fire, and I thought, yeah, that's fine. I wasn't too worried about it. To be honest, normally the fires in the area that I was working in didn't spread very quickly, so you didn't have to worry much. It wasn't like there was going to be huge wildfires, and the firefighting service were extremely good where I was based. I radio in and say I'm only about 10 minutes away, I'll go check it out. Now, I remembered going to investigate this area, and when I got there I can't see anything. There is, however, a strange light just above the tree line. I think this is really odd. It's not like a plane or helicopter, more like a drone, but this was actually in the times before we had drones, so I think this is a bit odd. It eventually flies off really quickly, and I think maybe the military are doing something here. Eventually I make it back to the station and radio in what happened. Someone else answers saying, "Thank God. We haven't heard anything back from you for hours. What happened? We're really worried about you and we're starting to investigate." I confused, say, "No, I was only out for probably 20 minutes. What are you talking about?" I then look over to the clock and I realise that I've been out for a good 5 hours. Even to this day, I still can't explain the experience, and it kind of gives me chills in a way. Now, for my last experience, it's kind of a weird one, but I want to know what you guys think about it. So this story actually comes from a friend of mine and not me directly. He said that he was out on a hike one day when he becomes completely lost. Now, he was lost to the point that he thought he wasn't going to make it back, and he didn't have any communication equipment at the time. He had basic survival training, so was actually okay, but he really thought he wasn't going to make it. Now, one morning when he was trying to figure out what to do or praying for signs of rescue, he sees a yellow dog up ahead of him. He's convinced that he's hallucinating, but he goes over to see what it's doing. It's playing with something in its mouth, and he quickly grabs it off, realizing that it's his shoe. He puts it on again and says, "Hey buddy, what are you doing here?" With the dog beginning to walk off. He decides to follow it. The dog keeps looking back and pointing almost in the direction to go. He says he's accompanied by the dog for at least 2 hours until eventually it runs off down an area that he can't actually see into. Worried about losing his friend, he sprints off after it, and he's met by a group of other people. It's a search and rescue team. One of them runs over, giving him water, saying, "How are you?" He says, "Great, your dog must have saved my life." He looks at him a bit weirdly, then at his buddy and says, "You need some water, bad." and eventually he gets taken off to a hospital. He eventually recovers and is completely fine. He goes to ask some of the rescue team what happened to the dog. Was it a wild one? And they say, there was no dog there. We didn't know what you were talking about. We thought maybe it was a stray one and you got bitten or something and were going crazy, so we had a look round, but there was definitely no dogs. Now what makes this even more weird is the fact that my friend still has that shoe to this day, with clear bite marks from a dog that couldn't be made by a person. Now I'm very lucky where I live. There's a beautiful forest and river that's not too far away. The river starts near the houses and the people, but if you follow it down long enough, you can eventually get over to a really nice secluded area of woodland. Now, I was previously a forest ranger, so as you can imagine, I always like to be out in nature and exploring generally. Now, for a while I didn't actually go out much. I still wanted to explore and whatnot, but I couldn't be bothered where it was extremely cold, so I waited until it became around April, May time, and I once again started following the river. The river had some birds and things on it, and some other big fish that you would very occasionally see in the river. I never bothered to fish any of these because I couldn't be bothered to, but I thought it was a really nice touch. Often I would find myself putting in my headphones, listening to some kind of book or just relaxing music and having a stroll down. I don't know, sometimes you can feel like the world's getting on top of you for no reason, and it's important to just get outside to relax. So in one particular morning I was doing just this. Now I know what you're thinking, surely if anything scary was going to happen it would be at night, not in the very early hours of the morning, but wait, I'll get to that part. So I set off like normal. I decided to stay far from the river because the rocks actually really hurt my feet sometimes and I have an issue with them. I say hello to one of my friends as I'm walking and I can see that he's just sitting by the rocks having a good time relaxing. People are good, but at this moment I need to get away just to clear my head up. It's still pretty warm at this time, though the weather's been very bipolar. I continue down until eventually I'm just out of sight of the other people. Now the area that I live in doesn't really have many people to begin with, so you don't have to go very far to be truly secluded or in what feels like the middle of nowhere, and often is. Now when I'm walking, I see a very large thing flying out of the corner of my eye. I just catch it before it goes off into the tree line, and I realise there's a very large bird there. It's strange because it looks all black and its beak looks very big. I think this is pretty strange because I've not really seen these before. It's hard to describe, but it's like a larger than life crow. I think this is odd and I continue onwards. I turn off my music for a while because I want to save my headphones and phone battery. I continue going and the forest gets a little bit darker, just because there's not much tree coverage. You have to be careful while you keep following this river though, because of course, the further you go in, the harder it is to get out, and I don't really want to be stuck out here alone. Now every so often, I hear this god-awful noise coming from the bird. I can't describe it other than just saying it's a horrifying sound. It's almost like a screech that sounds like it's human, but it's not quite. I haven't heard anything like it since too, which is pretty odd. I assume that it's gotta be another animal that this bird has just gone and annoyed, because surely this isn't making that much sound. I really wish I could describe it to you, but I can't. It's almost like a piercing sound, like metal being scraped, but more biological sounding. It really throws me off when I'm walking because it makes me jump and my eyes actually go blurry for a second from the adrenaline and the panic of it. I decided I should just keep on now. Now one really strange thing about this is that the bird seems to be following me, Now, I might be paranoid, but I decided to pick up a rock just in case I needed to scare this thing off. I mean, hey, it was ruining my lovely day for me. But eventually, along with my new friend the rock in my pocket, I forget about the bird and continue on my way. As I continue walking, I can see some strange markings on some of the trees. I think the children, or not really children, I guess teenagers or rebels, whatever you want to call them, have gone and put some weird red spray paint onto some of the trees. They're kind of like weird cross symbols, but not exactly. I know this hasn't been marked out by authorities because I know what that looks like from my previous experience of being a ranger. I make a mental note to maybe report this to the authorities so they can stop these stupid kids destroying the beautiful nature. God, I really hate things like that. I love nothing more than untouched nature. I hate when people don't realise the damage they're doing, and that if they do this over time, it's not going to look good. Plus, it's probably not very healthy for the trees, but I digress. I continue on to my walk until it's about midday. The sun's still nice and high in the sky, and I'm just sitting down to relax for a bit. I decide that I can't really be bothered to walk much further because my feet have started hurting from walking on the rocks close to the stream, and I want to get back to eat. I'm starting to get hungry. I have 2 small protein bars, but they aren't really doing it for some reason. As I'm sitting down, I realise that the hair on the back of my neck has stood up suddenly. I think maybe a mosquito's landed on me, and I actually slapped the back of my neck to try and kill it if there is. Nothing, I just slapped myself for no reason. I think that's a little odd. I suddenly noticed some movement again in the distance. Now, I can't make out exactly what it is, but whatever this is on the ground now, and I know for a fact it's not that bird. I think maybe there's some animal around. I'm not really in an area that has big bears or animals like that I have to be scared of, but you never know. If one of these things is hungry and injured or thinks I'm trying to get to its babies, I don't really want to be standing in its way. I decided I should pick up the pace and go a little further. It's starting to get cold too, which is annoying because I've only got my light jumper and shirt on. I originally had the jumper tied around my waist but quickly put it on. Now, as I continue on, I can't shake the feeling that something is just off. I was kind of triggered by the symbols, and that starts to race through my mind again. As I continue on, I stop suddenly and realise something looks off. I look off to the left, and I'm sure I can see somebody standing by a fire moving round. I look to the right just to make sure there's no other ones, and to my left again, and the person vanishes, but where they were standing is exactly the same. It looks a little odd because there's lots of foot tracks around, and they look recent. I decide I should be very cautious now, and slow down for a minute, stop, breathe, and just observe. I definitely can't hear anything, and I decide that it's just my mind playing tricks on me. Now I know what you're thinking, oh, you're a ranger, this shouldn't happen, but trust me, if you're in a job that's that isolated, you actually get used to the fact that sometimes your mind's going to fill in the gaps. It's not necessarily from you being bored, but more your brain. There's a thing where your brain tries to create images that aren't actually there, and I don't know, I'm not a scientist, but look it up and you'll know what I mean. So, I hesitantly make my way over there. As I get there, I realise that the ground seems to have been burned recently by a fire. It's almost like a bunch of people have been dancing around here, but I can't figure out exactly why this is. I look around and there should be people here. The fire's only gone out recently, but there's no one. And then, just to my left, I see movements out the corner of my eye again. I'm not sure why it always seems to be on my left side no matter where I move to. I actually rub my eye to make sure that nothing's in it. And then, I think, what's he doing out here? Why did he make a fire here? I say, hey, and my friend's name, what are you doing? And then there's just laughter. Now the strange thing is, the laughter doesn't seem like my friend, if that makes sense. It's still my friend's voice, but it's not welcoming. I say, hey, where are you? What are you doing? Now I realise something is off. I look around and I cannot see my friend anywhere, but I keep hearing my name being called out. I say, yeah, this is really funny, but what are you doing? I look around and again, I can't see anything. I say, hey, that's really funny, but I'm gonna go now. The voice then says, no you're not, followed by more laughing. Now I'm not afraid to use it. I turn around to leave and the large bird is there, just staring dead at me, almost like it's been waiting. I actually dropped the rock in fear. I didn't realise it at the time because of the adrenaline. It sounded almost like the laughter sounds were coming just from this bird. I pick up the rock again and start clapping, trying to make sounds for it to move, but it doesn't. It's something that I've never seen before. It's literally like a crow, but maybe 3 times as big or 4 times as big as a normal crow. And it doesn't seem to have eyes. I can't really tell because I didn't have my glasses on at the time, but it does not have eyes. I'm almost convinced of this. And I get a really weird feeling wash over me. I hear something behind me. I glance over my shoulder and glance back, and the bird's gone. That's about all I needed for my brain to tell me, it's time you get out of here. So, I decide to start out with a more medium pace. I don't want to burn myself out, and my trainers told me that it's much better that you hike and you don't get injured than if you just sprint out of here. But this feels more urgent now. Now I'm a relatively big guy, I guess, or maybe medium, I don't know. But I know if I really launch a rock I can probably hurt something, so I have my rock in my hand ready to just attack. Now I decide something's definitely off, and I know it's not my buddy playing tricks on me. We used to mess around with each other in the ranger station some days, but never like this. I mean, this is ridiculous even for me. But if this was them playing tricks on me, I'd probably respect it and actually find it really funny, but I decide I have to get on. I think what's weirdest is that the bird's followed me so far. I'm not sure whether it's very injured and it wants to eat me when I'm dead like vultures do, but this isn't a vulture. I decide that I should probably get out of here as quick as possible, and great for me, the easiest way to get back is following the river. I've not really been this far into the forest too, so I decide that I can't really afford to get lost here, and it'll probably get quite cold at night and I'd struggle if I couldn't make a fire. I didn't have a lighter on me at the time, so I know this isn't really an option. Again, with my training I can actually make a fire, but I'm not gonna. So I continue going. I continue a mild pace for about 5 minutes before I have to stop because the rocks are really hurting my feet again. I stop for a few minutes and start laughing to myself, thinking, what was wrong with me? And there's a loud splash just to my left again. Why does this keep coming from my left, I say as I slap myself on the side of the head, just enough to try and wake myself up. And there's a large splash of water that just hits me. A large rock has just been thrown into the water next to me, and there's that stupid crow. I throw a rock as hard as I can and it just flies out of the way. What the hell is this thing, I think to myself. Why is it following me? I now break some of my own rules and panic a bit and start sprinting. This is accompanied by laughter of my friend's voice again. Now, you can imagine I went into high gear now. Through the grace of God, I actually didn't hurt myself on the rocks or fall. Well, not for a few minutes at least. I eventually tripped and hurt my leg, and I started laughing to myself as I got up again, saying, this is such a me thing to do, and I continue going. The laughter becomes ever more faint as I continue on, trying desperately to get back. I sprint for a long time, and luckily I'm fairly athletic, so I managed to make it out of the secluded area into a more medium part, if that makes sense, where you're not too far from civilization. I turn around again and realise that I can no longer hear the laughing, and I don't think the crow thing's following me anymore. After a bit longer, I realise that I'm up to relative safety now, and I'm not far from where my friend is. I'm very, very relieved to realise that. When he sees me, he says, "Hey, what's wrong?" I say, "Yeah, I just had a bad fall, I'm fine," and continue on. I made it home, and of course the first thing I did was call my friend saying, "Hey, what are you doing right now?" He says, "Oh, I'm just at home with my wife and kids. We've been home all day." I don't need to hear anything else and say, "Oh great," make up some excuse and end the call. That was confirmation in my mind that this is one messed up situation that I still don't have an explanation for to this day. I don't know what that bird thing was doing or who that person was out there, but I'm glad I never had to find out. I would hate to say it was anything paranormal, but my mind instantly goes to some of the old folklores about creatures out in the woods that can imitate yourself or others. I don't want to say it was that, but I kind of hope it was, because if it wasn't the case, it was probably people with speakers trying to capture or kidnap me, but I just don't think that seems likely with where I live and everything. I don't know, it was a pretty awful experience that I'm trying my best to forget about. And yes, I haven't been back to that area since. Even if I do my own solo hikes now, I don't ever have my headphones in. I'm always listening, expecting to hear that crow or my friend's laughter again. I was hiking with my dad in late September on the west coast of Vancouver Island, which is usually when bears are flanting up for the hibernation are most likely to be aggressive, and since we're a couple of days walk from either the trailhead, we're on high alert. This is where we can only get medical attention, so we're far from safety. It's rained constantly, and we only had seen a single other hiker the whole time. He was travelling the opposite direction, and we had camped beside him 2 nights prior, so for the whole trip, the only tracks that we saw looked remotely fresh and were a single set of boots hiking coming towards us. It was a pleasant and solitary German tourist, and we'd only seen them in places with extensive overhead cover. The other tracks were washed out and filled with rainwater due to the days and days of constant rain, and it was really making it hard to figure out where to go at times. We were approaching a blackberry patch between ridges and hugged a small creek and smelled what we thought was a particular stinky bear, and since the blackberries were on both sides of the trail, with it only being about 3 meters between them, we have our heads on a shrivel. There was no overhanging trees at this particular berry patch, and there were dozens of meters across, and they're probably 2 meters high. My dad told me to hurry through as quick as we can and made a comment about how smart it was that we have the bear bells on us, and how dangerous it is to startle a feeding bear. He was a couple of meters ahead of me when I looked down and see a footprint. Now, it looked like an unshoed human footprint, except it's probably 2 inches wider and at least 2 inches longer than mine, and I have size 14 feet. There's also dermal ridges and only a couple of inches or so of raindrops, so it had been there recently. I mean, the scariest thing about it was that there was no other prints whatsoever, so it just appeared suddenly almost. It was so startled, probably, but so was I. I looked around as much as I could before my dad lovingly told me, "Hurry up," and that was the only track that there wasn't now a small puddle in. So before you discount it as double-stepping bear prints, where a bear's gone back before, there's no way it could have crossed that 3 meter distance without leaving more prints. Say what you want about black bears, they're not peaceful or graceful. There are also no grizzly bears here too, and there's no cougar that could have done this. It was also not a hoax too, because we would have definitely seen a person there, and to be interacting with the bears was dangerous to say the least. Now it's pretty weird though. We eventually managed to make it out of there without too much happening, but I don't really believe in Sasquatches, but I don't know what to believe. The more my dad explained it to me, it couldn't have really been a bear, so I don't really know what to think. And on top of that, the smell there was one of the worst things I've ever smelled in my life. I will never forget the image of the raindrops hitting the fresh tracks as I stared in disbelief. I grew up in a small town in western Massachusetts. It was a sleepy little community, and not much happened in the way of excitement, but this weekend we were going camping. It was a Memorial Day weekend, and it just turned 11. When we got to the campground and got set up, we were mainly by ourselves, and we only saw a few other families along the trail on the way to our campsite, and it was really peaceful. And after a long day of setting up and getting situated, I'm ready to crash out on my tent. Help me, help, oh God, I hear. I woke up like an alarm had gone off, and I can hear this woman screaming at the top of her lungs. She came running into our campsite and was in absolute hysterics with fear. My parents approached her to ask if she was hurt and offered her help. She pushed past and kept running, all the while screaming. We followed her to the ranger station, as did a few other people from nearby campsites. She woke up the entire campground with her screaming. I remember the police showing up and all the flashing blue and red lights. 2 officers were standing around her as the paramedics wrapped her in blankets. She kept saying the same thing over and over again. It's a werewolf, it has to be. The paramedics load her up in the ambulance and it drives away. A few more cops appear and begin searching through the woods. My dad said go back into the tent and sleep. I don't know what happened after that. Sometimes I still talk about the nights that it happened with my parents. We all remembered it and it still gives us goosebumps. I don't know what the girls saw in the woods that night. I don't know if it's still out there. So this story takes place in southeast Texas, within 100 miles of Houston. I was in college but had moved back in with my parents for a semester after some roommate drama. My parents live out in the country, miles outside of town with some acreage. The land in the back of the house consists of 4 zones really. You got to the backyard with the nice St. Augustine. The back, which is a section of woods my parents cleared of underbrush and kept a fairly well-maintained area. The back, which is a clearing that we used to go back to and do bonfires and parties in high school, and then the woods. After high school, my parents kind of gave up on keeping back the brush and weeds and anything except for their nice section of backyard. So imagine a big backyard fenced by a wall of tall weeds and large trees that goes back for a while, then a giant field of weeds, transitioning into soil and dense woods and some oak and pine wood. I also had this dog that my parents let me keep outside. They had a big chain-link dog who lived in there since my parents had no permitting fencing besides some barbed wire at the very back of the property, and this dog wasn't really the kind to stay in one area. It was a fact that she was so aggressive to other dogs, always going after them and acting tough. I sometimes worried she'd go out and get some of the chickens. She was about 60 pounds too. Now since I was in college, I had no curfew or anything and would always come home late at night / early morning after hanging out with friends or studying or whatnot. On this particular night, it was pretty cold out. Even though she still had a house and bed and straw out there, I felt bad for my dog, so decided to bring her in to sleep in the garage. I should mention, now I probably should have been more careful because this happens quite a lot, but somehow this dog always got me. She would wait in the back until the gate was unlocked and I was in the run, the gate closed with the unlocked horse latch. Run around me and pop the gate latch with her nose and bolt off, so of course she did it. And I was standing there in the cold in the middle of the night, annoyed because I knew I had to find her and return her. The moon was pretty bright and I had seen her flying into the weed wall and disappear, so I followed her into the night, calling her name. There were some little trails through the weeds and we tried to keep open so that we can access the property, but they were less wide than a person can walk through, and the weeds are taller than my head. It was dense. Anyway, I'd gone a ways and we had passed through the wooded section out into the clearing, and I get quiet, trying to listen to where she's gone, and I hear intermittent rustling out in the woods, which at this point I've got to point out is a really dark outline of the tree line and weed jungle. The rustling wasn't the sound I expected, since she usually crashes through the woods. In my head, I'm thinking, what the hell is she doing now? Honestly, I thought she's probably rolling around in some dead skunk, and I was gonna have to bathe her. Figuring it was my wild dog making the noise, I call out her name again. As I got closer, it becomes apparent the rustling is not the sound of an animal charging through the underbrush, but more like something intentionally shaking the trees. Like if you grab a branch and shake it, and all of the connected trees and vines shake too. It was close enough now to make out individual branches silhouetted at the top of the tree line, and I could see that whatever was going on was causing the trees to shake all the way to the top. This was off, and decidedly not my dog pacing around. I'm quiet and freeze. I hear in all these stories people talking about how they notice something in the woods go silent. I can't remember this happening really, but as I stood there, I clearly hear 2 or 3 loud deep huffs. I guess it kind of sounded like a ball with a deeper fluctuating, kind of fluttering sound. And it seemed to be coming from around my head height. For some reason, my mind kept registering that this thing was a lot closer to me than the tree line. I remember the distinct feeling that the noise is directed towards me, and I get a feeling in my gut like my whole body is stuck. Now, rational or not, I yell my dog's name, and with all my fear and urgency, I turn and ran as hard as I can. Either my dog heard my tone and got scared, or she was scared of whatever was in the tree line, because as soon as I crash through the weeds, she comes up on my left like a bullet. When I got to the open garage, she was trying to get in, desperately jumping. I closed the garage and put her in the kennel and went to bed. I don't know what it was, and at the time I convinced myself it was one of those hog sealers that you hear about on the news. I've been around plenty of cattle and have never heard one make a noise like that. Not saying it could have been something dodgy, but it just doesn't seem right. This was like 10 years ago, so I'll never know for sure, but I'm trying to think real hard of what it could have been in terms of a logical explanation. My uncle has a large area of wooded property in Missouri. It's about a 1.5 hour drive from St. Louis. He has a cabin there, a small man-made lake, and trails throughout the woods. When we visited, we would spend a lot of time driving ATVs down the trails. One of the trails leads to an abandoned mining area. The area has a toppled over mine shaft, a couple of cement buildings, and a sheet metal storage shed for core samples. And the sheet metal building with showers has a couple of rooms. There's a metal fence separating the 2 sections of it, which are mostly intact. A lot of the area hasn't been used for mining for lots of decades, probably even a century. All of this lies in a large open area that has no trees and just sand and mud flats, which made it a perfect place to drive 4-wheelers. We'd visit a few times each year, and take out the 4-wheelers out to the flats and have a great time riding. We never felt unsafe, and sometimes we would even go out to night to stargaze. Eventually we begin to realise that there's these sites popping up at the edge of the woods around the flats, like sticks stuck in the ground, in lines or weird circle patterns, almost like burn piles. And there was eventually shotgun shells, bullet casing, and beers around sometimes. We'd even see weird symbols on the floor. It was made out of trash or spray painted. Basically, it looked like people were shooting targets and drinking out on the flats with a touch of weirdness with the symbols. I didn't really think much of it, and we just decided that we wouldn't go out at night and started carrying guns around with us when we go out. What finally did it for me and kept me from going back out there is when we discovered that the fence has been nearly completely destroyed. Only the posts are left, and on every post there's some can or jar of something on top. And throughout the flats on the trails, it's rampant with these weird things everywhere. Kind of like containers stuck onto the end of branches and whatnot. Again, it wasn't too weird. Like, we know people like to go out on break and stuff and just do stupid things, but what got us was the scope of it. The fence was probably half a mile in length and every section of metal mesh had been removed, which would have been considerable because it would take a long time to do it and you'd actually need bolt cutters. And that alone wouldn't be too weird, but the thing is, none of the metal was gone. That was probably the most valuable thing. I would understand if they took the metal, but why would they just leave it there perfectly intact? Now, the last time that I was actually brave enough to go out there was 10 years ago. I've now moved states and have limited contact with that part of the family, so I don't know if anything else has happened. So it's nothing paranormal, just really weird. My husband and I always love to go camping. We live in CA and set aside 2 weeks every summer for a camping trip where we can get away and disconnect from the real world. Normally, we hit Death Valley for some backcountry adventures for a few days, then heading off into the mountains for some fishing. On the way back home, we usually stop for one last hurrah in Eastern Sierra. On this particular trip, my husband, myself and our German Shepherd, Ginger, are going. We ended up finding a lake to swim in for the day, and when we got tired, decided to find a spot to camp. We were both pretty familiar with that area, and knew that there was a free campground about 12 miles up the mountain. I never liked the Pacific campground because it was very cold at night at that elevation, even in the summer, but whatever. It was free and we had plenty of firewood. We pulled into the campground and there was only one tent pitched, but we didn't see any people at all. In fact, the whole evening there was not a single other person in sight. I loved it. It's really nice when it's empty and it feels primitive and nice and remote, so it was rare even to see a car driving past. After we got set up, the beer was flowing very freely. We were pretty trashed and hung out for a bit, cooked dinner over a campfire and hit the sack. My dog husband and I were all asleep and awoken by an ungodly scream in the middle of night. One of us grabbed the phone to see what time it was, and then my husband gets his gun, told me to stay there, and went out to see what was going on. Of course I want to peek out, and there was one guy standing right in front of the other tent that was set up across the stream, looking at the sky and just screaming. It was a horrific scream, loud and terrifying, normally just like something that would prompt a phone call to the police, but due to the area's remoteness, the cell signal is non-existent. My husband didn't want to go over there for obvious reasons, so he came back to the tent, and I don't think any of us slept a wink the rest of the night. The next morning we packed up and left as soon as we could. That same tent was still there, but again, no one in sight. We actually drove past there a couple of days later, out of curiosity, and the tent was still pitched in the same spot. There were no other campers there. This is about 10 years ago, and when we visited the area frequently, this was about 10 years ago, and we still visit the area frequently, since we now have a cabin about 20 miles from the campground. When we take a drive up the mountain and pass that campground, the scream is always the first thing we think about and wonder what was happening. I'm going to try and keep things clean and concise and to the point, so I'm going to start with the creepy but natural. I've been a hunter since I was like 13, maybe earlier, so I don't really remember, but being out in the woods since I was young means that I get to see or hear things that I can normally ensure that I wouldn't see in the cities. I've had a few different instances where I've been thoroughly creeped out in the woods, and I'll get to them, but I want to start with a not as bad one. So the guy who owns the land that we hunt on decided it was going to be a good idea to store some of the equipment on his land, one of which is a styrofoam float. Now, one year we got out there to check it out and pick it up, and that big piece of styrofoam had met its demise to a bear. Now you could tell that the bear really had a go at this thing because it was torn to shreds. Now, it almost looks like a bomb had gone off next to it. It makes you kind of worried about what bears are actually capable of. But anyway, now to the first real story. I was stalked by a cougar a few years back. When we had a deeper opener, I liked walking through the roads occasionally, and one of the first things I noticed this year is that I could have taken a picture of a set of tracks, really big tracks. I wish I did. The cat was obviously stalking over other animals in the area, but me being me, I decided that I shouldn't be scared of that, and it's probably more scared of me, but sure enough I jinxed myself. I attempt to do a deer push through some of the real thick brush to try and jump up and scare a deer, and get it to move through towards the other hunters in my party. I'm going to get to that soon, and I'm moving through the woods, yet I can hear something moving behind me. Every time I would stop, the noise would stop. I eventually got nerved, especially with the forest being quiet, and I decided that I'm going to get attacked by something that's found me. It's probably better if I'm facing it. So I turn around and walk straight back the way I came from and raise my weapon. When I began retreating back to where I come from, directly towards whatever it was making the sounds, I see a tan flash of fur and a long tail low to the ground turn around and run away from me. Then, the next day as I was doing a walk up to the main road with my rifle, I'm close to the tree line when I hear a deep growl. Immediately to my right, I turn my rifle to see the face of the cougar at my stomach level because it was raised up on the ground and towards the dirt. I calmly backed away and walked up towards the road that I came from. Now for wolves. One of my favourite ones, and it's quite a simple one. A few years back, my dad shot a deer and we gutted it. If anyone here is familiar with the field dressing of an animal, you typically gut the pile just out in the woods. This was like that this year, and we found out that there's a wolf pack that had actually moved onto the property. So, my dad leaves a gut pile a couple of 100 yards away from the stand. The day after, I was sitting in my dad's stand while he was doing a big loop on the property trying to scare deer towards me, and he was getting close to me, which I didn't know at the time. I was sitting in the stand and I heard a kind of wolf yelp from the gut pile. I texted my dad and told him he better hurry up because there's a wolf pack between us. Sure enough, by the time he made it back to me, he also heard the same thing, and it was within less than 100 yards away now. This year, just in November, I actually took pictures of old tracks very close to the trail and next to my size 13 boot, and the tracks are huge. I know there's one set of 4 that are walking together. I took a picture of the biggest tracks and I found out the wolf's probably 200 pounds or more, so it's definitely something you don't want to encounter out there. Now, for the one that sticks with me, this is the one that I want you guys to hear. Somewhere around 2006 or 7 when I was a late teen, I was at my grandpa's cabin and with my grandparents and my cousin. This was the last summer in northern Wisconsin, Danbury to be specific. The incident happened in midday when the sun was high in the sky and it was pretty warm out. My cousins and I decided that we would play some airsoft, and I was wearing camouflage and decided that I would have a better chance of not being seen this way and being able to ambush him by going into the woods, which was about an acre attached to where the cabins are off to, though it was really an acre that my grandparents owned. Now there were trails cut through and a big entrance which splits into a Y and loops around. This was used as a short ATV trail. Now while we're battling with the airsoft guns, we continue all the way up into the trail about halfway. We were still both winded and at the top of the hill next to a clearing in the woods when I decided to mess with my cousin and shush him and say we're being watched. Now, mind you, I intended this as a joke, but we both got quiet. I realised the woods were dead quiet, like you could hear a pin drop. I could only hear my own breathing and immediately feel like we're being watched, so I look in the directions all around us and try and figure out where this thing's coming from, scanning from edge to edge, and look into a clearing that goes down to a hill and a watering hole or pond or something. We're sure we're gonna see animals there. I scan left to right, then back and halfway on the right, really trying to focus on what was going on. That's when it came into focus, when I saw teeth. Teeth in the mouth of what looked like a wolf panting, except it's very tall. I mean, it's probably like to my stomach or chest height, and I'm 6'4". As I was taking in these details in a short amount of time, I realised the thing is staring at us, maybe even more at my cousin who's smaller than me. And I also realised that this wolf was not on all fours but crouching on its back legs against a tree, with its arms wrapped around the tree. That's right next to its arm. And this thing's almost holding its arms out to us with its long claws. In the short time that I looked at it, I said to my cousin that we have to go. Now my cousin took off like a bat out of hell. Being a baseball player, he was a bit quicker than me. He ran and I looked back at the creature and it locked on with laser focus, took my cousin and stood all the way up and began running towards us, which makes me run. What I remembered from it is that it was significantly taller than me, completely upright, and when I ran, I could hear it crashing through the woods behind me. After running and running, we eventually reached the wire, and this thing is standing there, waiting for me. I told my cousin go, go, go. We ran into the parking area by the shed and stopped talking because it sounded like it stopped chasing us now. At this point, we agree we can't tell our grandparents because what we saw essentially appears to be a werewolf and probably is more likely a bear, but I don't know. Unfortunately, my cousin never actually got to look at it other than just a flash of reddish fur, maybe more of a brown colour. But then again, he's lucky because every time I think about it, I get scared. I'm leading up to this, and even afterwards, I've always had a bad feeling about that night. Now, whenever I'm by the campfire, I always feel like I'm being watched. One of the things for you guys to memorize is that if you're out in the woods, if the woods go quiet eerily, most likely there's a large predator in the area. If you have a gut feeling, you should just follow it. Gut instincts are the reasons that our ancestors stayed alive. If I'd frozen fear, we would have died. I have one last thing to add, which is from a few years ago when I was hiking with my wife in a local park. We got followed by an unknown animal. As we're moving up through the trails through the woods, there is something tracking us, moving as we're moving, stopping while we stop. What made this weird is that it wasn't like a normal animal, but it sounded like we were really being followed tree to tree, and it sounded big. The reason why I said this is the thing chased me and my cousin, and people say that it's a dog man. They say that they're intelligent and apparently good at tree climbing. I also say that these creatures are apparently really good at following people, and seemingly managing to stay out of sight for a long while. Hello everyone, I hope you're all doing great today and enjoy these stories. Make sure you check out my Patreon for early access and my podcast in the description. And just quickly before we start, whatever you're dealing with or struggling with, you can get over it and I believe in you. You just have to stay consistent and stay in the fight. I hope you're all doing great and I'll speak to you all soon. Now, to set the scene for my story, at the time I was just a broke college kid. I was driving back from the campus back towards where my parents live. Now, I'd been on the road for quite a number of days now, stopping at different motels periodically not to get too tired and fatigued. When I reach my parents' state, it suddenly becomes a lot more wooded, and I guess the air becomes cleaner in some ways. I'm not really too much of a hippie about environmental things, but honestly I think there's a huge difference you find when you get back into the cleaner air states, i.e. the ones with more woods and forests. Now, to set the scene a little bit further, at the time of this trip I was pretty tired to be honest and kind of getting fed up of everything. Honestly, it feels like no matter how much I work, I didn't seem to be getting anywhere. The assignments were basically piling up and I was getting really fed up of it. I mean, I guess a lot of you can relate to this, but at the time I didn't really realise that it was important to manage time, so I'd basically implode every once in a while, hence why I was pretty happy to be driving. Now, to be honest, I really found that I was resetting while driving through those woods. Now, on this particular day in question, I was feeling pretty tired. I've been on the road for a little bit now and I only had myself for company, so to try and make things a little more interesting, I decided that I was going to drive through the woods. Now I mean off the road kind of, well at least a true pavement, onto the kind of gravelly roads until it's basically a forest road. If you live in those kinds of areas you'll know the difference. New to these areas I was not, but this one I was. I pulled onto this main road when it wasn't too dark. The sun was beginning to set and I was basically on the very last stretch. As I turn into this part of the road, I immediately almost run over a rabbit and stop because of it. I feel a bump in the road and I'm convinced that I've just killed the poor thing. I say, oh god, you've got to be kidding me. I really wanted a break from having things on my conscience and already feeling burnt out. It felt like everything was starting to accumulate. I got out and luckily it all seemed to be fine. That was when I noticed someone off the side of the road. I said hey, I almost killed that thing and laughed, hoping they would respond, but they don't seem to say anything. They just stand there, just off to the side of a tree, and don't say a word to me. I realise that I'm not very welcome here and decide that I probably need to get a move on. The person isn't dressed too strange. They have a flannel jacket on, I think that's what they're called, which is kind of a dark yellowy colour, some jeans on and a cap, and I really can't see much else. They seem pretty tall, at least 6 feet, and I don't want to stick around for much longer. Glad that I've not killed the rabbit, I'm happy to set off again, though I have to be a little bit more slow now, as I decide that I'm going to avoid the main road and go off the roads that are kind of more winding and easier to get lost to. I know it's stupid because I thought I was escaping the danger of that person, but instead I was probably getting myself somewhat lost. I take a quick look in the mirror and I can't see them anywhere, so I think I'm fine. While I'm driving, night has started to set quickly, and I turn on the radio for some music. It's just some of the local stations which aren't really good to say the least, so I ended up putting in a cassette tape that I have. And yes, I'm an old person, so we used to use cassette tapes. At the time I was listening to Nirvana, and it was pretty cool. I love Smells Like Teen Spirit, and some of their other classics they had on there. Now, the first part of my return goes pretty well. Everything's relatively normal, and I do make way. I'm pretty sure I'm heading in the right direction, but I realised soon that maybe it wasn't a good idea to go off the main path. Where I'm driving, I pretty much come to a snail's pace because of all the trees around me, and I have to be very careful not to go over something that could puncture my tyre. Now the radio cuts in and out basically because I'm going relatively deep into the forest now, so I really have to mind my way because I know I'm kind of getting lost at the same time due to the unresponding radio signal. However, lo and behold, I can see some red lights just up ahead of me, signaling that there's probably another car up there and that I should probably follow them to get back to civilization. I know this is a stupid idea, but when you're lost, it seems like a good one. I turn on my lights momentarily and try and capture what kind of car it is, but it's pretty hard to tell, but it's basically a black truck. I try and get a closer look, but I realise that I can't actually see their lights that well. That's bizarre. It seems like they're driving in the dark and I've only seen the reflection temporarily, or maybe they turned their lights off when they saw me, or they were braking. I wasn't too sure, and then I noticed something else odd. I can't seem to see any kind of registration plate on the truck ahead of me. Now this is probably a bad sign, to be honest, because why would anybody be driving around here without a reg plate? Well, I guess there's probably a good chance that they're up to something dodgy or are not insured, so I decide the best thing I can do now is just keep quite a nice pace behind them. I continue driving regardless and make sure that I keep a distance. It's now blatantly obvious that I'm behind them because of course I'm coming at them with my beams on, so at least I can accept that they know where I am. I continue following for a number of seconds until I seemingly come up right behind them and I realise that they've stopped for some reason. Now this is pretty odd, and you don't really want to have this in the forest. The problem really is that somebody might be coming up behind me now, and I'm not going to be able to escape. I keep looking in my rearview mirror because I'm pretty paranoid that something dodgy is about to happen, but I can't figure out exactly what it could be. I roll down my window for a second about to ask if they need help, but I realise quickly this is a stupid idea, and luckily some higher conscious in my brain kicked in and said, "Get back, don't do this." So I start to reverse my car a little bit. After a few seconds they turn on their lights and I can actually see the rear views a bit, and they start driving. I give them a few seconds to go off and I seem to not be able to catch up with them again. I'm still not exactly sure where I am at this point and it's quite annoying. It's starting to become a little bit foggy at the same time, which is really restricting my visibility. It seems strange because the truck basically went into nowhere and I really can't figure out where they could have possibly gone. Also the road was pretty cruddy up here. There's these massive holes in the road and I'm really worried that I'm going to bust my tyre or my car. And I know my mum would have killed me if I had done that, and I hate to think what would have happened if my dad caught me in that situation. So I plough onwards just very cautiously. The trees are relatively big at this point, and they're pretty full of life. If I roll down the window just a little bit to get some air, I have to be careful for bugs not to fly in. I think at this time of year especially, they're really in full swing of life, and it's pretty nice on most occasions. Just not this one. I continue going down the same path until eventually I make it back onto a main forest road, if that makes sense. I'm very relieved at this point because I'm no longer lost necessarily and I have a rough idea of what direction I have to go in. Basically, this will be pretty much a one-way thing until I get to the main road again, and then I'm only about 50 minutes from home. Success is in sight. I continue driving and realise that my gas isn't too good at the moment, so I have to make sure I get back and don't get stranded out here. Now when I see it this time, it's like it's had a little crash, but almost comical how obviously it's been set up. It literally looks like a truck is crashing into a tree and someone's laying next to it, but there's no damage whatsoever to the truck. While driving a little further, I can catch the reflection of something up ahead. Now I realise that it's the same truck again. This time I can just see the glow of its tail lights. I decide to stop and scope it out. I have some cheap binoculars with me and I try my best to see, but unfortunately, with astigmatism, it just looks like a big blur because of the headlights. God, how are my eyes this bad that I can't even look for danger? I decide to put the binoculars down, actually throwing them back towards me in frustration, and decide that I should very cautiously creep up and investigate what's wrong. Now it appears like the same truck from before has just gone off to the side of the road, and it's perfectly parked in front of a tree. The tree's completely fine, but there seems to be something next to it. I pray to God it's not a body, but something just feels off in this situation. I start to edge closer and closer until I realise that somebody seems to be laying on the ground. They're dressed in basically all black with a strange kind of robe on. It's almost like a cape, but not really, but they just look really out of place in terms of what they're wearing. I then realise that the truck is literally perfectly fine and the tree, and the person, funnily enough, has moved very slightly. I realise that I'm probably in grave danger now, and this is a setup. I feel frozen with fear and don't know whether I can go on or not. I decide the best thing to do now is just reverse the truck, then turn around. I'm keeping my eyes fixated on this person 100% in the road, making sure they don't move, and making sure that there's nobody waiting in the truck for me. The last thing I want to do is get shot by a shotgun, and I'm too young to pass away like this. I slowly back out and look 100% forward the whole time until eventually I round a corner. Now luckily for me, nothing happens at this point. I'm able to turn around and make it onto some more forest roads where I can take the long way round. Now granted, going through the back roads is really a bad idea because this path alone is bad enough, but coming off the road makes it even worse for me. But something is off about this. I know now that I have to get away from this person because something is wrong. I decide to stop for one moment, pick up the binoculars and scout out before I proceed. I quickly turn off all the lights and look in my binoculars. I realise now that if I slowly come out of my car and kind of crawl up to the trees, I can investigate with the binoculars. Feeling truly like G.I. Joe, hell of a name, I decide that I'm gonna do it. I slowly crawl out, making as little noise as possible, still with the engine off and all of the lights. I don't bother locking the door, and I slowly crawl up to the position where I need to scout out what's happening. I can no longer see the figure, but the truck seems to have moved a little bit further. God, I knew they were up to something. Luckily for me, I didn't panic too much. Don't ask me why, I was probably just fed up and wanted to get home. I continue watching and basically nothing happens for a good 2 minutes, me purely fixated on the truck, slowly being caught up with the sounds of the insects and whatnot around me. Suddenly I hear rustling to the left of me. I stop dead in my tracks, not moving another inch from my vantage point. I decide to stay perfectly still, and I can hear this person slowly getting closer and closer to me through the forest. I can hear crunch, crunch, crunch slowly getting louder. I try my best not to look to my left, but I have to. I need to know whether I have to fight or run now. And suddenly, I notice it's a creature on the floor. I don't know exactly what this is, but maybe it's some kind of possum I haven't seen before. It's hard to tell because of all the adrenaline running through my body made my eyes shake a little bit and not focus. I go, God, under my breath, and then immediately back to the truck. Now I realise that the truck is gone, which is really bizarre because I was watching that thing only 10 seconds ago and I didn't hear it move, but maybe just maybe I was so scared that I couldn't really look anywhere else. Now realising that the potential danger seems to be heading off in the opposite direction as me, I decide to wait for a while, but I want to scout out the area before I go any further. I didn't remember to lock the truck at the time, and I considered going back to do it, but realised that I'm going to hear anyone pretty quickly if they go there. I decide to continue on my G.I. Joe mission and crawl up closer and closer to where the truck was. I then begin crawling very slowly and quietly through the leaves, and I realise that I'm not making much sound and I feel pretty safe at the time. My eyes have basically adjusted to the darkness pretty well, and I'm just being more careful not to go into little puddles and things. I don't want to get my clothes crappy, especially not out here. I continue on, and I eventually make it up to the edge of the trees, basically where the road is. Now from here I can see pretty well in both directions, and I can see that the coast is clear. I still have literally no sign of the person or the truck, so I assume that they've gone off in another direction trying to look for me. If they stayed on the main path, which I'm pretty certain they have, then they're not going to be near me. They've probably gone in the opposite direction because I wouldn't have been able to escape otherwise. I decide the best thing to do now is slowly crawl back to my original position. I can hear movement once again. Just the second I start turning and I duck down, I bury myself in leaves and wait. I can hear a click 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 around me with twigs breaking. I can hear this continuing for a few seconds, but it sounds just like the animal I heard before, so I'm suddenly at ease again. Now I'm not 100% convinced that this is what happened, but I'm far quieter now just in case, and decide to lay buried as long as I can. I think I'm pretty well buried, and I'm just getting annoyed at the smell of the leaves around me. They smell absolutely disgusting. I wait here for a good 10 minutes until I start to get quite cold quite quickly, and realise that once again I should really be getting on the move. And I take the leaves off myself, now realising that I wasn't as well hidden as I thought I was. Now one strange thing during this is I can see a red light in the trees, maybe 4 or 5 feet in the air. I don't know what it was, and I only saw it for about 5 seconds, but it definitely distracted me. I then realised that I have to crawl back, and I should probably stay as quiet as I can to do so. I turn round and I start making my way towards the truck again. Now everything's normal at first, and I don't really have anything concerning. Every so often I can hear the sounds of animals around me, but I kind of come at one with nature at this point, and I'm not really bothered by them now, and I'm pretty sure I can differentiate the difference between those and people. Whoever was trying to get me is now long gone, and I slowly make it back to my truck. Now I'm glad that I didn't bother locking it before, because it would have made far too much sound, and I jump back in. I put the ignition in, and I do something relatively stupid. I don't turn on any lights whatsoever. I'm worried it's going to draw attention to me, and my night eyes are pretty well adjusted now. I turn off some of the lights inside the cabin that I can control, and I very slowly start reversing back out the way I've come. Now to say this was difficult would be an understatement, especially because some condensation is built up on the rear mirror and the rear window, but I make it somehow. Now I was doing some incredible reverse driving here that I really wish some other people could have seen. I eventually make it back onto the path, and I take a look to my left and right and can't see anything or anyone. Presuming it's safe now, I start off. Now maybe adrenaline or senses are caught up with me after my adrenaline dump, because I end up going very quick. While driving I notice a small little cabin building just off to the right of the road, but it looks like it's been long abandoned. I'm driving very quick, and some rain has picked up at this point. I decide that I have to put on the lights because it's too dangerous now and I really can't see where I'm going. I went over a bump slightly too quick in the road, and I skid, I'm not kidding, seconds from hitting a tree. I managed to kind of oversteer around the tree, and I curse myself for being so stupid. It then dawns on me that if I drive at this pace, I'm probably going to catch up with whoever's ahead of me. I then realise the best thing I can do is turn my normal beams on and flash my full beams periodically, just so I can illuminate corners. But of course the issue with doing so is that it's going to notify everyone around me as to exactly what I'm doing right now. I continue driving at a more normal pace, and I realise that I have to do this or I'm going to run out of fuel pretty soon. While driving, I'm suddenly met with a flash of light. It kind of dazes me for a millisecond and I'm partially blinded. Suddenly I can see well again and I realise that it was a lightning bolt. A few seconds later, I almost jolt forward and fall out of the driving seat because the loudest thunder I've ever heard in my life seems to have gone off at that exact moment I was driving. Most likely heightened from this situation, I feel really scared again. What's worse is the trees are getting much bigger where I am now, and it's making driving very difficult. I decide to turn on my high beams for most of this part of the journey, though I know it's not good for my car battery, and at the time my car was pretty old, so this is an issue. Around another corner and the rain's picked up a lot and I go through quite a big puddle, and I kid you not, the car stopped. I pull my head back and say, God, you've got to be kidding me. This literally looks like that scene in Jurassic Park when the car breaks down and the dinosaur comes. I didn't have one of those cool Jeep things and I don't have a sunroof to look out of, but God, I was scared. I ended up punching the steering wheel, and luckily it didn't set off the car horn because that would have easily notified others of my position. I quickly turned my head around, scouting all around me looking for anyone else that could either help me or might be a danger, and I don't see anyone. I jump out of the car and quickly start pushing it. I managed to just about get it off of a rock that it was stuck under. I mean, that's probably an exaggeration, but I just kind of shimmied it into a better position. I start kicking some more rocks and things around so I can clear up a path, and my tire is now free again. I quickly jump back in and my feet are soaked, and luckily the car starts now. Luckily for me, no dinosaurs come to eat me. I then turn off of another forest road, and I know exactly where I am now. I'm not far from a main road, and God, I'm excited. Just before I turn on, I stop to give way to potential oncoming traffic, and my hands tighten on the steering wheel. At first I'm not sure exactly why I'd done this, then a second later I realised that my subconscious has noticed car beams coming. I quickly turn off the engine and all of the lights with it, and I duck down in my seat. Another car's coming. Then it hits me, it looks just like the truck I've seen before. I lay as low as I can as it slowly passes me, quickly jumping up when it's about to round the corner. Then I realise that it has a license plate, it's a different car. I let out a sigh of relief as I realise that I'm probably a little too paranoid from what happened. I start my engine again, and then turn onto the road. Now for the first couple of minutes of driving, I'm going at a ridiculous speed again, kind of neglecting my fuel. I realise soon that this is a pretty bad idea because I'm not actually sure where the next gas station is. I drive for another 10 minutes until eventually I make it back to roughly where civilization should start, and I know a gas station isn't too far away. Now on this drive, I basically put down those people to playing a cruel prank on me, or maybe they thought it was a friend of theirs or God knows what, and I've actually calmed myself down a lot. I decide that I'm not going to report it to anyone, I'm just going to go asleep, and I know for a fact that if I tell my parents, they're never going to forgive me for driving this course alone, and they're going to demand that they go and pick me up from my college, and that's not going to happen. I don't need the embarrassment from them, thank you. So, I continue on. I eventually pull into a gas station, and my God, I've never seen such a middle of nowhere one as this. To say it looked creepy would be an understatement, and I'm very tempted to go back into the forest again because I'd rather deal with whatever was out there than this place, but I don't have much of a choice. My meter is just over empty and I'm on an incline, so that's probably accounting for it having that little bit above it. I sigh and say fine, if I've got to go in, I've got to go in, and I close the door and step out into another puddle. God, this can't get any worse, I say to myself. I decide with the $10 I had remaining in my wallet that I'm gonna spend $7 on gas, and I'm gonna use the other 3 on getting some kind of food or whatever as a treat. As I get closer, I realise that this isn't really going to be an easy gig, because there's not much food in there, which does actually annoy me because I'm quite hungry, and they only have them small portable gasoline things that you can fill up when it's an emergency. I walk in there and I realise that they have some chocolate bars, and I'm quite delighted. I say, hey, how much for the gas and how much for the chocolate? Clearly with a $10 in my hand. And the attendant says, well, $2 for the chocolate or $10 for the gas. And I regret to say that I had to get the gas at this point, and I hand over the money. Now the person working in there, the only person in there I should say other than me, seems really weird. He seems to hold eye contact for far too long after you've said something, and I just get a really weird uneasy feeling off this guy. He has a weird moustache. He's dressed in a one-piece overall like he's just come out of a farm, and it looks like he doesn't know what the 21st century is. He's about 6 feet tall, and I start to realise that he's kind of matching the description of the person I saw earlier. The clothes are a little different, yeah, but he just gives me really weird vibes that I've not really experienced before. He holds his eye contact for far too long every time, and it really annoys me. I go to leave, then he says, where are you from? Out of town? I think, oh god, this is the end for me, and I start panicking and start looking towards the exits quickly. I do so very blatantly because he says, relax, relax, we're not all gonna kill you out here, which made me feel 10 times worse. I then say, no, I'm from very close to here, I'm just on the way home from college. He says, college? What'd you need that for? I don't actually bother explaining the course I'm taking because I'm sure he's not going to understand it or why I'm doing it. Though he keeps on pestering on, and I tell him that I'm doing business. He laughs and says, business? I didn't need a business degree to get in here. Then says how it's a waste of money and starts blaming the government and other things along those lines. He then says, no really, what are you doing out here? I then feel very uneasy, and I take a few steps back, and he says again, I'm not gonna kill you, but what were you and your friend doing out here? I'm very worried now that this guy is absolutely off his head, and he's just imagining that someone else is there, and maybe he sees people. I say, no one's with me. He says, why didn't he come in the store with you? I say, what do you mean? He says, who is that just got out of your car? I say, no one, somewhat angrily. He says, I literally saw someone get out of your car, stand in the middle of the car park, just stare at you for a good 4 minutes, then walk off into the forest. The penny dropped. I turn around, then turn to the store attendant, then once more. I try to speak, but no words can come out. I just quickly tell him to lock the door, lock the door. Thankfully he follows this and says, what's wrong? What is wrong? And sits me down, but I'm too scared to move. I then barely get the words out and explain, I think someone's followed me. I'd come here on my own. Then it hits me of what happened moments earlier. The truck I saw earlier. I start crying a little bit with the fear, and he manages to calm me down and says, don't worry, I'm gonna go and look. You're safe here. He quickly goes to grab something from the back, unlocks the door, then runs out. He's gone out there with a shotgun, I realise, and I tell myself, this can't be happening. This can't be happening. Terrified, I quickly go and lock the door because I'm worried that I'm gonna get followed once again. I don't know whether this person is playing some kind of big game on me, and this is all just fun for him, and he's the one in the truck. I can't be sure, but he's gone outside with the gun into the darkness as the rain falls down. I can hear the occasional lightnings, and that really makes it feel like it's a horror movie right now. I put my hand in my head and close my eyes, and I hear bang 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 on the door. I look up and thank God it was the store attendant again. He says, hey, what are you doing? Let me in. And I apologise and quickly open the door. He said, hey, whoever that is long gone now, but I want you to see this. He takes me outside with him still with the shotgun, which is probably the only reason that I went outside with him. You can see some muddy footprints that lead from the opposite side of my car away from the driver's side that stand exactly like the guy just described to me, then slowly fade off into the forest. This guy was telling the 100% truth. There was someone in my car that I have no idea about that was in there for God knows how long with me. The attendant then says, "Quick, we're coming inside and calling the police," and I have to thank him for this. We get back inside and he makes me a coffee quickly for free. He then hands me the phone and he says, "I've dialed it for you." An officer picks up and I report exactly what's happened, and they say they're going to send someone out to investigate. I say, "Do you want me to wait here?" And they say, "No, it's not necessary." And they then send out their squad and hang up. I then thank the store attendant profusely and I apologise for being so paranoid, but he said it's understandable. He said there's people out here that you don't ever want to mess with, and he said he's heard some stories. He then says that he'll follow me out to my car, but he can't go any further. I thank him profusely again and he says it's nothing, and turns around cold-heartedly almost and heads back into the store. I then get in my car again, and again, I'm ashamed to say it, but I absolutely floor it, going way too quick. The next 30 minutes or so of the drive feel like an absolute blur, and I eventually make it back onto the road that leads to my parents' house, back to true civilization. I pull into my parents' driveway, park up and quickly go to bed. Everyone else is asleep now, it's almost 3 in the morning. I ended up hitting the sheets and waking up the next day feeling exhausted. I didn't tell my parents what happened, and my dad jokes and said, "How'd you get caught out in the rain?" I never had the heart to tell them, even to this day, because I know how much it would have scared them. I tried to follow up and get answers from the police about what happened, but they didn't give me any information and said the investigation's still ongoing. This all happened years ago, and I still have no idea who is in my car with me, or for how long, or what they planned on doing to me. When I was a kid, my family and I were hiking in the mountains. We got to a small clearing at the end of a dirt road and we saw a red convertible with its doors open. My dad said, "Wait guys, let's check this out." He walked around the car a few seconds and then immediately started speed walking towards us. He didn't even look back at us and just said, "Let's go now." I was curious, so I started to walk over to the car but saw several bullet holes and blood on the seats. I ran back and said, "Dad, what happened?" He said, "I don't know, but the hood was warm. It still gives me chills." One of the more weird experiences of my life was while driving through the woods in pretty much the middle of nowhere. My car seemed to stop completely randomly, and I thought there was hailstones outside. There was prodding on the top of my car, then the sides, even to the point that I could actually see the impact on the window, but there was no hailstones whatsoever. It was literally like hundreds of people were punching the sides of my car, and suddenly it stopped, like nothing ever happened. It was so scary that I didn't inspect the car until I got to my destination, but I could clearly see some dents in the side of it, like people had been punching it or throwing rocks, but there was no rocks or anything. So one night, I was walking to my friend's house from my grandpa's. The fastest route was to actually cut through a trailer park surrounded by woods. There was a path if you knew the correct yard to trespass, sneaking through a family's yard. Now I finally come to the edge of the woods, only to see very distinct orbs of lights about the size of softballs hovering in front of me. I froze and stare at them for a while, kind of squinting, cocking my head back to see what the hell they are. I decided to approach them and then they flew away. Now I don't believe in ghosts or anything, but I still don't know what I saw to this day. Now this is going to be very long, and everything's based on real life events. So my family owns a lot of property in Heltus, Texas. One ranch actually has a ton of history. Now I grew up on this ranch, and my dad owns a small single wide trailer. We were neighbours with my tia and tio. They're about 100 yards to the left of us. The back of our trailer is really close to thick woods, so it didn't really have a backyard. We are kind of plopped right in the middle with the woods, but our driveway was connected to the main dirt road, if that makes any sense. Well, I always felt creeped out around the backyard area and our back door. Like I said, we didn't have a backyard. It was a heavy uncleared wooded area. We never used the back door, and it was always locked with one of those chains that went inside. I was actually a very active kid. I couldn't sit still or inside and chill. I always had to be outside exploring. Usually my cousins and I would explore the ranch, build forts and ride four-wheelers, but there were times when we would go exploring but I would go off on my own. I remembered one time I was looking around the trailer alone, trying to find a good spot to build a fort. I was about 8 then. I went right to the end of the trailer to explore. Now this area had a large cleared brush. Behind me was the wooded area. I remembered walking around focusing on finding a good fort spot when out of nowhere I felt very uneasy. My attention immediately went back to the wooded area. I felt as though someone was staring at me. The feeling was so intense, I literally booked it into my house. I remembered that I wasn't really sure exactly who was there, but I just knew someone was near and staring at me. There was another time too, not too long after, that I started experiencing weird things, where I came home from my cousin's house and gone to get some clothes since I was staying the night with her around 9 PM. My cousin's driveway connects to the main dirt road in the same area as my driveway. Anyway, when I opened the front door and walked into the trailer, I noticed the back door was completely open. Again, I was staying at my cousin's house, right next to the driveway over, and my dad was down the road at a local bar. There was no one at the trailer for hours. My dad never opened the back door ever for any reason. I immediately felt very spooked and tailgated it back to my cousin's house without getting the clothes where I initially went to pick it up. Now there's many other weird things that my cousins and I experienced on the ranch, but this experience is by far the most alarming. It was during the summer of '07, so we're about 12 at the time. We were at my cousin's house, and my dad took us to Hollywood Video earlier that day to rent a movie. This is what he did to make up for being at the bar until around 2 AM. So we ended up renting the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and decided to watch it until around 1 AM. We chose to rent this movie and watch it at the time because we love to get spooked. Well, after we had finished the movie, it's around 2 AM and we're still up and want to play or party around. So we decided that we would walk to my trailer and pick up the boombox so we could listen to our CDs we'd just burnt on LimeWire and jam out and dance. Remember, my cousin's driveway is connected to the main road parallel to where my driveway was. We went to walk in, and out of nowhere we hear a chainsaw going off in the hill about 50 yards to the left of us, way too close for comfort. Again, this was 2 AM in the middle of nowhere. All the land surrounding us is owned by a close family. No one would ever go there to clear the land or operate a chainsaw, not at 2 AM in the dark. We had to use a flashlight to see the dirt road in front of us, that's how dark it is. When we heard the chainsaw, we all paused and looked at each other confused. Once we processed what we're hearing, we ran as fast as we could, and make it to the trailer just about, over to my cousin's house. Unfortunately, my dad wasn't home. He was out doing whatever he was doing, so we couldn't tell him about what we just heard or ask for a ride back to the cousins. Now none of us even had a cell phone at the time. We ended up grabbing my loaded .22 and walking back with it in hand. Now luckily we never heard that chainsaw again. Now to this day, my cousins and I are perplexed over this experience. There's literally no logical explanation for the chainsaw we heard at like 2 AM. In a weird way, it almost sounded like a very loud recording of a chainsaw rather than an actual one. Again, none of my family would wake up at 2 AM and start clearing land/brush, or play with a very loud chainsaw recording for any reason. I feel especially weirded out because at the time we just finished watching that particular film. Even though we were trying to get spooked, we know it wasn't just in our heads because we all heard it and we weren't expecting to hear it either. We all heard it as clear as day at the exact same time. My cousins and I told our family about the experience multiple times. My family is always weird. My dad got short with us and said, well, shouldn't have been out there at that time. My tia said something like, well, this is why we always tell you to get back inside after the dark. Now, for some extra info, our family has been in Texas since it is a part of Mexico. My cousins and I are part of Daughters of the Republic of Texas, and our history runs deep. We also have native/indigenous lineage. However, I don't know too much about it, but anyway, I was very creeped out by this, and hope to get some answers. So this happened on Thursday, and I want to know what you guys think. Okay, so I totally understand if no one believes me, but we're still unsure of what happened, so let me explain. On Friday, we're making our way to Clark Summit. As we were walking, now one by one we noticed that we're veering off the trail. I said to my friend in front of me why he's going off the trail, and he said to our friend who is in front the same thing. The friend told us, I can hear a woman talking, can't you guys hear it? Now we can't hear anything. We tried to convince her to leave it because it's already kind of dark, and we were close to where we wanted to set up camp on the trail. The friend in the front is female, and insisted what she heard sounded like a woman calling for help. And it sounded like it was really close. She said she felt like she is inclined to investigate a possible female in distress. While we're totally okay with going about our business, really. Okay, so I got a bit spooked at first hearing that because she's obviously serious, and we're absolutely certain we can't hear whatever she is. Here's where it gets weird. We only veered off the trail about 300 to 400 meters, yet at one point, we're completely lost. We don't have any fancy gear or GPS stuff because we never really needed it. But we've been on this trail long enough to know that we haven't gone far yet. Yet, we couldn't find any trail or direction after walking for a good 20 minutes. I started to feel weird and really lightheaded. And when I mentioned this to another, they said they felt the same. Now, this was already getting pretty strange. It was like something changed the environment around us, or moved us somehow to another location. I have no idea which way to go, and now it was fully dark. My female friend said she also heard the woman say that I'm over here and please help, saying it sounded like Curtin crying. So now we're somewhat lost, after only walking for about 20 minutes off a large trail because my friend is hearing voices. We decided to stop walking in any direction, because the last thing that we wanted to do is get lost in the dark. Now we had 2 tents, yes, and sleeping bags in our packs, so we found a clearing and set up. We figured once the sun was out, we would easily find our way back off to the trail. Before we could even lay out the rest, I noticed a tree near us was moving as if someone was climbing it. Now, it was really dark. I wear glasses, so I really struggled to see. So then I called them over to see. I thought it was an animal at first, but it wasn't. It wasn't anything. I could see the outline of what was roughly a human shape, but it was transparent, like completely see-through. That's the best way to describe it. It's similar to the way that heat waves move on the pavement and whatnot. It's the same effect. They see it too. My male buddy said to me, "What are we looking at?" And when we finally spot it, they all said the same thing. Transparent, but still visible through the foliage. We all just stood there, still whispering theories back and forth as to what we were looking at. I thought maybe it was some kind of optical illusion, but they both immediately jumped to aliens, of course. The thing just sat there, perched on a large branch about 50 feet up. It was like it was watching us. The other oddity is that after staring at this thing for about 10 minutes, the rest of the forest sounds seemed to go back to normal. Now this was really odd. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I have goosebumps all over me for realizing that it suddenly went silent for no reason. After about 10 minutes of us standing there, whatever this thing was started climbing up the tree and ever more, until we can't really see it anymore. We approached the base of the tree slowly, walking in a circle with our nets cranked up trying to see it. It was too dark, and the trees were too close up for us to see the top. We didn't hear it jump to another tree, so we assumed it was still up there. We're all obviously spooked, so we're not really sure what to do at this point. Now after 5 minutes of walking, we managed to get back on the trail. Now I literally dropped my bag and said, "What the hell?" And we all stood there very confused, trying to confirm what we were seeing. Now my buddy likes to joke and said maybe we walked through some hallucinogenic spores and had imagined all of it, but I highly doubt that. But whatever happened, it seemed kind of like, I guess, predatory. Like something was luring us, trying to confuse us. My friend still thinks that we were messing with her and not hearing the woman. Was it that thing we saw imitating a woman? Did we get lost on the trail? This is easily the weirdest thing that I've ever seen in my life, and we still don't have a good theory as to what we saw. I mean, this thing wasn't an alien potentially, but it seemed to be humanoid, but it was 100% transparent somehow, able to climb a large tree without making any noise. I truly don't know what we encountered this day. While working as a park ranger, it wasn't uncommon to get calls out to investigate fires, and that happened one day, and boy, I'll never forget it. I headed over to a reported area, and there was already a few other police there and firefighters. They had already checked out the area and knew nobody was in there. I went to go and look at a cabin just before it collapsed, and I kid you not, I saw a dark figure come, stand perfectly in the middle of the flaming doorway, and not move even once it collapsed. They remained completely black amongst the fire, and seemingly just vanished after that. I wasn't sure whether somebody was there and maybe just somehow melted, but we searched through the whole area and there's literally no one. Oh, how it feels to be lost in the middle of nowhere with no idea where you are or how to get back. So, I'd like to share you my story. Now, my father was a park ranger, and apparently his dad was too. So my father and grandfather would often lecture me on the dangers of being out in the middle of nowhere by yourself, and how you have to be so careful because you don't know who's out there or what could happen. But me being a younger kid at the time, that did not bother me one bit. My mindset was, well, the further out into the woods I go, the more chance of adventure there's going to be for me. So I'd always like to go wandering off a little further than where I was supposed to go. You know, just kind of like typical kid stuff, I guess. But looking back on it now, it's much stupider. And of course, I was kind of blind to any stranger danger at the time. But I digress too much now, so I'd like to get to my story. Now, this isn't set in a beautiful, picturesque summer's day. No, this is set in the middle of a cold October month in winter. Now, at the time I'd finished school, and I wasn't working, and to be honest, I didn't really know what I wanted. I used to work in some old shop somewhere. It was basically a big surplus store, and I really liked the owner and got on with him well there. I worked with him for a little while, but I had to quit because it was God. I can't put into words how bored I would get if I was in the back room on my own. I'd have to do work in there for 2 or 3 hours at a time. The thing was, customers would come in the front, but nobody would really want to talk to me, so I'd get really bored. Now, my grandparents kicked up a riot when I wanted to quit. They kind of still had the more older mindset that you have to keep a job. You don't know how quick they're going to come, but God, working for $6 an hour, or less I think, is not worth it. Especially once you finish school and you really want to have a good time. So yeah, I basically didn't know what I wanted. I wasn't really a big fan of what was being offered in school, and I'd been to the college open day things, but it really put me off, to be honest. The things they were showing me looked incredibly boring, and I really didn't know what I wanted to do. So, having my adventure walks was one of my favourite things. I guess now it probably was out of pure boredom, but at the time it was the opposite. I eventually did become bored of being out in the woods on my own, because after a while you kind of need more company, but it's what I did at the time. For me it was probably a good thing going in more winter months, because I could kind of get away from everyone, and at times that was just what I wanted, just to be away and with myself for a while. So, I say bye mum, I'm going out, and she says please promise me you won't be too far, but you have to be back in time for dinner. I say yeah, don't worry, I won't. That was no issue. Whenever my mum made my dinner, it would always be too hot, so I wouldn't always end up eating it all. So I set out. I go across a small stream, and I'm walking along a lake not far from where I live. Now the tree lines are absolutely beautiful here, and you have to be quite careful not to fall in the water. I have my raincoat on because yes, you guessed it, it's raining a lot now. And I just take a few seconds just to appreciate how beautiful the rainfall is onto the lake. I always used to think when I was younger these were some kind of animals, and my dad would used to joke that it's some kind of fish trying to get air, and me being stupid would believe him and beg him to go fishing to try and capture some of the fish. I'd even put my hands in trying to capture things, and my dad would just laugh. Yeah, sometimes he could be quite funny like that. So, for this particular adventure, I don't really have a direction. I just kind of wanted to get away from everything and the responsibilities of life, you know. I say that, it's not really like I had many back then, but God did it feel like it for me. So, I continue walking while carefully avoiding different puddles and things. The leaves were kind of like a dark orange or red colour, I guess, and most of the trees themselves were barren of life. It kind of set a tone. It wasn't too far away from Halloween, and I actually kind of felt like it was a bit of a themed walk, so I guess it was good. So, just to the left of me is this beautiful lake, and to the right is a more dense forest. I eventually say goodbye to the lake as I continue on my walk. I'm basically following one of the streams uphill a bit, which is a direction I don't usually head in. Now the only annoying thing about doing this is that I got really wet really quick because of the water. Now, as I continue up, I'm careful not to slip and fall on any of the mossy rocks. I eventually make it back up onto a big path, which I know sometimes people like to jog down, but not very often. It's quite a muddy track now, and I have to duck under the trees, which annoys me because I already have quite bad posture, even back then. The low-hanging branches keep slapping me in the face too, which is really annoying, but I continue. I decide to take a turn off of the normal path and go into the woods themselves a bit. I mean actually off the path. I eventually come up to a small bridge that I need to cross over, and this should lead me slightly further away from people. Just to the left of me is a continuation of the stream and the right, and I take a few seconds just to take in how beautiful everything is here. I continue, and I start to press quite deep into the woods. Now it's not dark, but I guess because of the clouds stopping any light piercing through, it's starting to look quite dark. But I know I've still got quite a good few hours of daylight, which is important because then I can be back in time before my mum gets me. Strangely, I notice a very bright orange tree up ahead of me. This is far brighter than any of the other ones I've found around me, which I think is quite odd. Then I notice there's a few more like this, but I don't think much of it. I take a while to appreciate and I think to myself, God, I'm so lucky to be out here and away from everyone. I guess my mind kind of gets lost into the overthinking patterns where I'm trying to think of what to do, what not to do, and what to chase. I know that I'm definitely on a different path from most people, but I don't know, I kind of just feel a bit like, I'm not sure what I want to do with school. I know I don't really want to study, but there's not much for me to do. I don't find much of anything interesting, really. I had a couple of friends at the time, but they really weren't the greatest, and they weren't necessarily people you could ask for advice. If you wanted advice about one thing, you get told something else, which would probably make your situation worse. Or sometimes when I would speak to my best friend, he would just ramble on and on about himself, and he wouldn't have paid any attention to what you said. He would literally wait for you to finish your sentence before immediately talking about himself, and it just kind of made me feel a bit trapped in my head. I didn't really want to talk to my parents about it. I kind of felt better talking to my friends, but like I said, I wouldn't really get much back in return. So yeah, here I am now, kind of getting lost in my own mind a bit, going deeper and deeper, ever so little, into the woods without realizing it. Now, a good indicator of being far away from normal is the fact that I haven't seen anyone. The rain will usually do this, but not to this degree. This was actually quite rare, to be honest. Again, I think this is odd, but here I am. So at this point, the rain started to slow down a little bit, which is quite nice, but I keep on getting hit in the face by random bits of water that are falling from the trees. Now, weirdly, I come across an abandoned road that I've actually never seen before. It's weird because you can tell this has been abandoned for a long time, but there's definitely no cars that have been on it recently, but why have I never noticed it? I think this is odd. It's kind of like more of a dirt road, but it's weird, it just looked really out of place. Now at this point, I'm walking through some trees that have more life to them, and I guess they look really pretty compared to everything. And once again, I begin getting lost in my mind. Now, when I'm walking, I realise every so often that there's a strange flash of light just coming from the right side of my eyes. Now, I'm actually quite paranoid that maybe I've got some kind of mega migraine coming on or something's wrong with my eyes. It seems like it's during every second step that I notice this weird flash of light. I try my best to ignore it and continue walking, but I can't seem to. It's really bizarre, it literally is like if I step down hard enough it does something, I don't know, maybe nerve related, and causes my eyes to go weird. It's strange because when I decide to remain completely still, I can't really see much of anything. Everything is completely normal, and there's no flashes, so I continue with my walk. But every so often, I'm struck with that flashing light again, and it's actually starting to annoy me a bit. I think, oh god, well now, I've already had quite a bad issue with my vision before, and I don't really have the best eyes, so I truly don't want things to get any worse for me. But every so often, I'm convinced I'm seeing a strange flashing light coming out the right side of my vision, and it will not stop. It's bizarre too, because even if I try and stop and replicate the steps I was doing, there's no flashes now. But hey, this is a problem to worry about if it persists, I tell myself. Though in the back of my mind, truthfully, I'm a little worried. Now, eventually I make it up to a really nice spot not far from a beautiful body of water, and I take a few seconds just to sit here. I realise now that I'm truly not sure where I've gotten to, but up ahead of me I see a small, kind of man-made bridge thing. There's no water running under the bridge, but you can see that these stones have been arranged specifically for you to go somewhere. This is really odd because there's no trail path up here, and I haven't seen anyone at all, so nobody else is up this way, and just ahead of it you can see a path. This is strange because again, it kind of looks like a path someone's made, but it looks like no one ever goes up here. Now, just off to the left of me, I can see a strange figure just off in the distance, somewhat behind a tree. It's really bizarre, but they seem to sink slowly down into water, and I can't tell what it is. I think this is probably just a tree or something, so I just continue onwards. I'm walking now, splashing into the water. I don't care because my shoes are very waterproof, but as I'm doing so, every so often that flash comes back again. This time it's dead ahead of me. Now this is really odd now. There shouldn't be any flashes in front of me, and the problem I had earlier is out of the right corner of my eye, in my peripheral vision, not directly in front of me. But every time I stop and strain, I can't see anything or anyone. Bizarre. Convinced that there's something wrong with my eyes, I decide that I'm just going to see what's up here, then I'm going to head back home. Now while walking, I can see the abandoned remains of a campsite from long ago. It's a tent which has all holes in it, and it kind of looks like an old military issue one, but somewhat older. It's quite bizarre being there. It looks very out of place, and there's not really any signs of any life around here. I'm definitely going up to something that somebody used to live in, but I don't know who or why. So, I just keep going. Now, while I'm walking, I slip slightly and have to grip a tree quickly just to steady myself. As I do so, I look up and there seems to be quite a large, abandoned house up ahead of me. I can't really see it well, but it's basically in a different direction that I'm heading. I decide to go and investigate because why not? I then take my first few steps in that direction, and I hear a click sound now. It's not really like anything you'd be worried about, but it's quite a weird sound. It sounds like plastic being pressed down upon, but again, I don't give it much thought. I'm kind of just blinded to my problems ahead of me with my vision, thinking, oh god, am I going to lose some of my sight or what is this? And I start to panic a bit. Sometimes I can overthink about the smallest details, and that's basically what's happening, but I'm trying to put on a really brave face now. I continue walking, and there it is. It's not as big as I thought it was, but it's kind of like a big old cabin house thing. I don't know how to describe it. It doesn't look like anyone's been there recently, but there is a small muddy path that leads up to it. And I've come this far, so who am I not to continue on my adventure? So, I continue walking, this time sloshing in the leaves next to the path. I don't want to get my shoes too muddy even though they're waterproof because they're brand new pretty much, so I continue onwards. Now every so often, I can see some kind of marking in the trees. It's almost like wooden carvings that almost look like they're there naturally, but you can tell they aren't. There's lots of lines and crosses on them, and this is weird. It's something I've not seen before. You can also see a rock formation that seems to channel some water stream down that's definitely man-made. I start to think maybe I've come up to some old logger's cabin and this is what they were looking for. Water. I don't know, it seems pretty bizarre. As I get closer and closer to the structure ahead of me, I have a feeling that maybe, just maybe, there's someone in there. I don't think it's entirely likely, however, and I continue going up to it, so I edge ever closer to this thing, not really thinking much of my surroundings. I eventually make it just outside of this cabin thing, and I just stand there for a moment, confused about what I'm seeing. And then my dad's voice kicks in my head. Son, what are you doing there? What have I told you before? I think, God, is this my dad really speaking to me or just my conscience? I look around and realise it's just in my mind, and my dad's advice has really struck to me now. I know I probably shouldn't explore this, but I've come this far now and I don't even know how to get back. Plus, if I ever wanted to go back to this place, it would probably be really difficult to find, so I decide that it's best for me to go on. I make my first few steps towards the porch area, and I try and look through the windows, but it's quite hard to see into this place. It's really quite a nice building, but it's gotta be probably 70 years old or so. It looks quite dated, and I just hope that the door opens. I give a quick hello, quite loudly, and I actually knocked on the door, half expecting somebody to open it, but nobody does. I think this is good because it's a sign I should be able to go in here without having too many issues. So I go ahead and try the door. Surprisingly, it does actually open just a bit. I have to force my way in somewhat, and I take my first step in. I go to call out again, but I stop myself thinking, if someone's in here, they've definitely heard me, but nobody's replied. I'm then met with a really weird smell, one that I've not really smelt before, and it's absolutely disgusting. It smells like somebody's put tons of waste into one area and burnt it, then repeated the same process 20 times. It was awful. It actually makes me put my shirt over my nose just so I don't have to smell it. Honestly, it was so bad. Now, this place looks like it's been abandoned long ago, but strangely there's some signs of life. There's a kettle and other cooking utensils that don't look so dirty like the rest of this place, and there is a mattress and a bed in another room, but I don't bother going through there. Now, the smell seems to get worse as I head into the hallway. I then realise that there's steps going down, and there's lights on strangely at the bottom, just enough to illuminate the bottom of the stairs. Again, the sense of adventure takes over, and my dad's voice is screaming in my head to get out of there, but I don't do that. I just continue on. Now, I take my first few steps, and I have to be careful because my shoes are wet, so it makes me start to slip a little bit, and I steady myself. I now realise what I'm looking at. There's a little tunnel system just ahead of me. Now, it's a very tight squeeze, but there's light coming from it, and I go for it. Now, the floor's pretty dirty but very dry, and the gap's not very big. I can just about fit through it, and I'm not really that big. I'm still slender to this day, but I kind of worm my way through. I'm actually becoming quite claustrophobic, but manage to calm myself down, and I eventually squeeze through the gap. I steady myself up and I look around, and honestly, I'm still not sure what to think of it now. There's a really large basement area that it opens up into, and it's not what you'd expect to find. No storage or boxes, no spare bedroom, no boiler system, no nothing. There's a very dated laboratory with all kinds of different specimens and things in dusty old jars that I can't really see well into. There's all kinds of chemical and things in vials everywhere. And strangely, there's no bad smell here, just the smell of chemicals. Now, it must have been powerful because I can smell everything through the sleeve of my shirt that's covering my nose. Now, this is really bizarre. It literally looks like some kind of mad scientist laboratory underground, but why would it be hidden like this? I don't know. Now, I quickly go to switch sides of what's covering my face from my right sleeve to my left because I want to open another door I can see, and as I do so, I'm suddenly struck with that smell once again. That disgusting smell which is more powerful than the chemical smell that I'm feeling right now burning through my nose. It's coming from the door ahead of me. I take one step closer to the door, and I look behind myself. There's definitely nobody else here, right? I take a step closer and I put my hand on the door, and crash. There's a loud sound from above me. I have to hit my arm to stop me screaming. I immediately withdraw from the door and stop dead in my tracks. I can hear something or someone walking around up ahead of me. Oh god, you're really in trouble now. There's no way that I'm gonna go through that door that I put my hand on before, but I'm certainly trapped now. I stop absolutely dead still for God knows how long, and I don't hear any other sounds. It now dawns on me that I probably shouldn't stay in this room for too long because of the chemical smell, and that I also need to try and get out without making any sound. I've become as quiet as I possibly can, and I slowly take one step forward. I slowly begin to crawl and make my way through that gap. I continue until I'm almost at the end of it and I hear a door close above. Oh good, someone must be leaving, I think to myself. I then push myself clear and start slowly making my way towards the steps. Being as quiet as possible, I take my first step on and it makes a slight creak sound. I stop immediately, so angry that there's no way I can get up here quietly. I realise I'm gonna have to wait it out now, and hopefully this person is gone, whoever they are, or however many there are. I wait for probably an hour, but realistically 15 minutes because of the adrenaline, and I start to make another step up those stairs. I must have only got about halfway up when there's another loud creak. I realise now I don't really have the option to move back. I turn around and I'm sure I can hear the door creak from in the other room that I didn't open. Half expecting some kind of zombie to come out and come and get me, I start to power forward and get ahead, just making it to the top of the stairs. I take a look around and there's no one, luckily. I'm frozen in place but absolutely aware of the sounds coming from behind me. I then slowly make my way to the front door and carefully close it behind me, and that's when I hear it. A kind of scream sound that I've not heard before. I can't figure out the direction that it's coming from, but I then realise that there's something just up on the tree line. It's a very dark figure. I realise that it's a person with extremely disgusting clothes who looks impossibly tall. He was probably about 6 feet 4 or 5, but to me at that age was an absolute giant. I say, hey, and again there's that scream sound. I realise this is someone I can't reason with, and that's when he starts running. Without making another sound, I can see his lanky silhouette beckoning towards me with something in his hand. I'm frozen in fear until eventually something kicks in and I bolt into life. I have no idea what direction I'm going in, but I know I have to get away from this person. Suddenly, it becomes clear that I need to get out of here and I start sprinting into the woods. Now the problem is, I'm no longer on a path. I don't know what direction that I'm heading in, and I'm being hunted. I glance over my shoulder quickly, and I start crying a little bit. I can't see this person just yet, but I can see the cabin. I start sprinting and slowly making my way across different puddles and things, trying my best not to be heard and not to be seen. I can see more of the strange markings on the trees, and as I'm on my journey, I can see something just off to the left. It looks like another campsite, but this one's covered in bags, and that smell hits me again. Even at my most fear, I still realise how disgusting this thing smells. I eventually realise that I've come to an area where the trees are going to be really difficult to pass, and this area is very steep and probably really going to slow me down. I'm frozen for a second, and I look to my left and see a lake. There's a dated sign that says danger, deep water. I realise I can't go this way. I look back and I can hear him screaming again, not far away now. I can't see where he is, but he definitely knows where I am. I realise that my only option is to try and go up this steep hill. and I basically have to kind of swing from tree to tree to make it up here, half slipping the whole time. I scream, "Who are you and what do you want?" And there's silence now. Annoyingly, the sounds of the rain are basically covering up whoever this is chasing me, or however many there are. I've only seen one so far, but I have a feeling there might be more people. I make it up to kind of a flat area, and I have to catch my breath for a few seconds. Just as I'm doing so, there's that flashing again. I've realised now that it's probably the flash of a camera, and something is definitely going on here. I don't know if this is the same person chasing me as before, but my god, is it weird. Now I know that somebody was taking pictures of me earlier, or at least that's what I think it is, or maybe it's my eyes going bad, but I don't know. I luckily make it to a more downhill area now that I know I can pick up the pace on, and being slender comes as an advantage in this situation because I can basically dart in between the different trees. I start saying aloud, "I'm sorry Dad, I'm sorry Grandpa, I should have listened to you both. I don't know what I'm doing out here on my own. I'm not a big strong ranger like you. I'm sorry." Really thinking these are going to be my last words. Crazy thoughts to have at such a young age. I wasn't necessarily annoyed at myself for going on the adventure, just more annoyed for being dishonest to my parents. I thought if I didn't make it, I would have hated the fact that I'd lied to them. Now I can no longer hear the screaming coming from behind me or see the flashes, so I start to walk a bit slower, desperate to get my breath back and suffering from quite a large adrenaline dump, feeling kind of weird. I keep walking and I've realised that if I continue going downhill, I should eventually make it to a larger bridge which should be closer to civilization. I start following the edge of the lake, every so often looking behind me, and now at kind of like a light jogger's pace as I start to pick up speed again. I've probably been on the run for a good 20 or 25 minutes, which is an insanely long time to be running and sprinting through a forest going up and down hill. My legs actually feel like they're jelly, and I'm really scared that they're going to completely give way at some points and that I'm never going to make it back home. But luckily, just off in the distance is that bridge, and honestly it looks like the gates of heaven to me at this point. It honestly felt like I was taken to another world when I saw this and snapped back out of this crazy dream one. I then go as quick as I possibly can for another good 5 or 10 minutes, eventually making it over to that bridge. I'm too scared to look behind me once more. I've realised that my only option to really get out of here now is to wait for a car, and I stick my thumb up like I've seen in the films, and eventually a car stops for me. I quickly jump in and they ask what's wrong. I say, nothing, I'm just a bit far from home, and I say where you need to take me. And then the driver just looks at me and says, "Well, you're a long way from home, but don't worry, I'm heading over that way. I'll happily give you a ride there." And I kind of zoned out and didn't say anything for the next hour or so. I then ask how much further is it, and the driver says about another 50 minutes, and it hits me just how far away I've gone from the area that I knew. I must have been out for hours, but I guess your time kind of gets distorted when you're in a traumatic situation. Eventually they drop me just off where I can quickly depart and jog the rest of the way home. I say thank you, and I do that. I never even caught the name of this driver, but I really wish I did because I'd love to thank them now. They probably ended up saving my life by dropping me off. I just wish I could have told them what happened, but I just couldn't. I was too scared. I eventually got home and surprisingly had only missed dinner by about 10 minutes, so my mum wasn't too angry. Now my mum would have done me for absolute murder had she have known what had happened, and God knows what my dad would have done, so this story remained a secret up until now when I decided to share it. Now, I don't know exactly where the area is. It would be impossible for me to find now, as I'd moved town and so did my parents. But my god, I don't know what I discovered that day, but I can only imagine it was either some kind of drug then, or maybe somebody was doing God knows what out in those woods. I just hope to God that nobody else ever had to discover it like me, but I hate how stupid I was for going to investigate.